Hello, everybody. Hey, Martin. Hey,
Hi,
Nancy.
everyone.
Anna. Yeah, a lot of familiar faces. Great, 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 great. Okay, so this is about a segment of the 6-week class that we are teaching on type 6 that begins March 6th. But we decided that we wanted either way to have people understand these really important hallmarks of type 6 and how to recognize a 6. And in the course, we'll be covering the lexicon and talk style that they use, all the body language that 6s use, the phrases that they use, what they say in the typing process and why, and all the different patterns. But in this class, we're focusing on the collages and the microexpressions. So what the 6s sent in the way of pictures, and then what expressions I identified were indicative of type 6. Okay, so most of you know about me, or if you've attended other classes, you know that I just love teaching the Enneagram, and I certified with all 3 schools in 95 and 96. And then I also had the good fortune to study with a 10-day intensive with Claudio Naranjo, which was amazing because he was willing to type the individuals in the group, but he was also willing to teach the subtypes after I gave him my research. And he loved the research because it validated his theory of the subtypes, and it filled in details of the 27 subtypes that he had not discovered yet. So because of that, he was willing to teach for the first time the entire 27 subtypes, and then asked me to add his viewpoints into my book, which I did pretty much when I got home. I just added it and then did another printing. But I also had the chance to spend a week with Oscar Chazo. And it's very, very different when we get a chance to see people in person. And you can catch them on videos to get a sense of their energy. But as you know, when we see someone in person or just one-on-one in a course, we get a pretty good idea of what they might be like. The thing I would say immediately is that Oscar Chazo is a very, very dynamic 9. And one of the errors in the dissemination of the Enneagram is the loss of the intellectual 9. So they'll type as other types. They won't type as 9 because they'll say, I'm not lazy. But that's a misunderstanding of the type. It's a laziness of awareness, not being a lazy person. Wanting your comforts when you're self-pres, wanting to be comfortable within a group as social, and wanting that one-on-one intimate bond with another if you're sexual. But above and beyond that, you could be an intellectual 9 or a sensing 9. Intuitive, you could be any combination. In fact, one thing that I discovered is that 9 has all of the 16 personality types. Now, some cluster more, and that's another course that I taught with Joyce Meng on basically the Enneagram stackings, tritypes, and 16 personality types together in one class. And I just made it available by type if you're interested in it, but you only want to know about your type. Okay, so in this case, as I mentioned, AD, I call him affectionately, Alessio David, as I mispronounced his name, has been studying with me for quite a while and has certified in the Tritype. And when he was presenting for his final weeks with certification, he wanted to present on 6. I had shared a lot about the errors and with the transmission and typing 6 and 9, which was a really, really good presentation. So that's why he's included in this presentation. But go ahead, AD, tell them a little bit about you.
Sure. I see a lot of familiar faces, so nice to see you again to who already know me. So, Alessio David, I'm located in Spain. I joined Catherine's team in 2021 and studied with her since. So, yeah, and certified recently. My mom is a six, so I know sixes very well.
My
Yeah.
eldest son was a 6 too. So, and my best friend is still a 6. We don't
Yeah.
change our types.
Yeah.
But what I will say is that I probably have the most enjoyment supporting the 6 and 9 and finding their type sooner rather than later. And we'll explain a little bit more about why that's true. So the first thing is that I came across a quote years ago by Winston Churchill that used the phrase enigma when he was trying to describe a complex situation during World War II. And basically, he said in a particular way that it was a very puzzling situation. And the enigma comes from a Greek word, which means to speak in riddles. And it's used to describe people or things that are puzzling. And he was very puzzled in 1939, and this was in one of his speeches when he was describing a complex situation. So really, the type 6 has a defense strategy that needs to remain hidden while simultaneously appearing to be the friendly, interpersonal individual. But their enigmas are riddles wrapped in a mystery inside a puzzle. Now, I've heard it different ways too, but our beloved 6s fit this category. And the reason for that is that all primary types, 3, 6, and 9, need to adjust to the circumstances of the moment. So the 3 is modulating their emotions. Is this a sad situation? Is this a happy situation? How do I need to be right now? How do I need to communicate? The 6 is modulating their thoughts. Well, who knows more? What's true? What's not true? What should I say about myself? What should I conceal? And so they modify it depending on who they're with. So they're modulating their thoughts. And 9s are modulating their actions. Should I say something, not say something? Should I do it immediately like the 8? Should I research more like the 1 and just see what's going to happen? And what is key about these primary types is there are more 3, 6, and 9, and actually in the order of 9, 6, 3, than there are any other types. So statistically speaking, in the world, there are more people with 9 and 3 and 6 than any other tritype. And then there are, the most are type 9, then type 6, then type 3. But the margin is so large that literally, statistically, most of us would have at least one of those 3 types in our tritype. And many more have 2 or 3. So it's not unreasonable that a lot of people struggle with typing because one of the primary types becomes invisible to the person who is that tritype. So if you have, in this case, 6 in the tritype, you're not going to see it unless you notice that you always want to prepare, and that the 6s who've learned mind over matter just think, oh, well, everybody prepares like that. Oh, everybody's worried about driving over that bridge. Or everybody wants to go this way rather than that way. And I kind of go, well, not everybody, at least one person doesn't. I don't have that issue. I don't even think about that. It also gives 6s the opportunity to realize that their anxiety is meant to be there. Now, there can be debilitating anxiety. I'm not negating that. But the 6 is meant to operate from a state of uncertainty and go in search of certainty. So all sixes struggle with feeling they shouldn't be anxious. Now, as I mentioned, those that have learned mind over matter are a whole different story, and they become like the type that could be in special ops and, just mask their feelings from themselves and others. They can identify with something else. They could be interrogated. They've had anti-interrogation training. Well, some people feel like that because they grew up in a household where they almost needed to learn that. And then the other question sixes will ask me is, well, I think I mistyped because I grew up with trauma, or I wasn't accepted in my family system, or I had trouble with kids at school. I was too shy, and I didn't know how to navigate that terrain when I was younger. And you don't change your type, but trauma does give you identifications about what happened in your life. But identifications are not type. They're behaviors. They're attitudes that can change. The type does not change. So when people say, oh, I used to be a 6, but now I'm an 8 because I'm confident, it doesn't work that way. And the reason is that we're talking about defense strategies. Okay, now I'm going to come back to that as we go along, because AD and I are going to show you all 9 tritypes of type 6. Okay, here's common mistypings. And in particular, what I would say is that all you have to do is think of the defense strategy of each Enneagram type. And because the 6 does not see their own type, they will identify with a stronger type in their tritype, one that's more obvious. But what is it more obvious about? Behaviors. But is the Enneagram based on our behaviors? No. The Enneagram is the only personality typology based on our motivation. And our motivations are beneath those behaviors. So it's not what we do, but why we do it. So the 6 that has 1 in their tritype in second position will usually think, oh, I'm really responsible. I'm a 1. I don't want to make a mistake. That's probably true. But the difference is that 6 and 1 both don't want to make mistakes, but for a very different reason. 6 does not want to make a mistake where they'll somehow be at odds with someone or in trouble with someone or have to deal with something upsetting. And the 1 just owns their own authority. They're not worried about getting in trouble with anyone. They're just really upset with themselves if they made an error in judgment, because it goes against their defense strategy that they know what's right. They know what should be done and what is the superior way of doing things. And not to be the best. Instead, the 1 does their best because they should. When we get to type 3, they do their best because they want to be known as the best. And so it's a different reason. So anyone that initially, as a 6, saw themselves as responsible is an important factor, or they have, because of anxiety, they can have a little characteristics like OCD, will mistype with their gut type and think it's type 1. The really helpful 6, and sometimes even the really submissive, shy 6s, 6, 2, 9, tritype, the Good Samaritan, will miss that they're a 6 and identify as a 2. Why? Because the 6 is naturally very supportive. They identify the person that they respect and they feel safe with. And then once they have the person they feel safe with, they're very supportive and loyal to that person because that person will in turn keep them safe. And I'll explain more about that as we go through. Now, the 3, the 6 who knows that they have strived for success, they want to be successful, they want to do well, they did well early on and they want to maintain that. and let's say they're social. Social subtypes can mistype as 1 and 3 also. So the most common tritypes that are going to mistype as a 3 or an 8 or even a 9 are the 631, the 638, and the 639. So what you'll notice is that the 6 and 3 are in all of them, but just the gut type is changing. So then that person has to determine, having 2 primary types and the 639 with 3 primary types, have to really start to sort for why they do what they do at an even more distinct level. And whatever they think they know, they have to go deeper to see which one is actually in charge. Now, another piece lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram is that the most emotional type is type 6, not type 4. So a lot of 6s will say, I'm emotional, I feel things, I'm sensitive. Well, 6 and 4 are both sensitive and they can both be emotional. But let's look at what kind of emotion. The 6 will show you multiple emotions over a very short period of time. You'll see it in their eyes, their expressions. And when we get to the microexpressions, we'll try to make them, we're going to show you how 6s have developed their muscles in their face that reflect what they're doing when they're thinking. And when they think, they can go side to side with their mouth, side to side with their eyes, up, down, all around. In fact, no one can do an eye roll better than a type 6 because they've developed all these muscles. It actually kind of gives me a headache to do an eye roll because I don't do that. I don't look behind me. I should. I never do. I look in the rearview mirror, but that's about as close as I get. But 6s naturally are checking and double checking. And if they have 1 in the tritype, it's even more so. But back to the emotional. The type of emotion that the 6 has is fleeting and changing. And they're trying to conceal those emotions. The difference with the 4 is they've made an identity of having a particular mood, a particular relationship to their feelings. So they identify who they are based on how they feel, not just about the moment, like the 6, but about everything in their life. Because leading with an image type, that's how all of us form the identity we need to have to feel safe. So if you lead with your identity and your image first to avoid feelings of pain and grief and shame, then it's going to be perfected. So if you have 2 sensitive 4s and 6s that are emotional, the relating will be totally different. The 6 will be more personable naturally, even if they're an introvert. And the 4 will be more circumspect and articulate about the way they discuss something. They're not as spontaneous as the 6. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, because if we consider the type, the instinctual stacking, the tritype, the Myers-Briggs type, and other systems, that can all modify this. But overall, the emotions of the 4 and 6 feel different to the outside person as well. And most 6s realize that they're trying to conceal a lot of those emotions because they don't want people to know they're scared. They don't want people to know they're ill at ease, unless they're trying to telegraph for assistance, which 6s can do. Like if a 6 is being interviewed, let's say they're even an actor, an actress, and they're on a talk show, they might feel really anxious. And at the beginning, after they're being introduced, and they could be a famous actor, actress, they can just say, oh, I'm so nervous. Well, only the 6 will say they're nervous. It's a way to discharge that adrenaline that has built up. And it's also a bid for understanding and grace. Now, my son, as a social 6 2-9, realized that people were really nice to him when it was his first night working while I was in college in a restaurant. And so after that, he just always told people that he didn't recognize that it was his first night because he thought they'd just be nicer to him if he made a mistake. But it's that kind of clever thinking and using your kind of adorable quality, which even the most ISTJ rigid 613 is adorable because they have their own way of doing everything and they're just naturally engaging. Now, anyone can be kind of frustrated or irritable, but that's any type, any combination. So really what I'm talking about is the type as a whole. And the most significant thing is that the introverted, smart 5 that kind of feels socially awkward is usually the INTP 6. And the reason for that is that in the dissemination of the Enneagram, the fact that we always have both wings and both lines operating every day, all day, like a little combustion machine. And one day I'll have it animated for you because it's really that we go from our type to our first wing and back to our second wing and back to our earlier line and back to our second line and back. And it's just operating so fast that we don't see it or know it. But those who studied later and didn't have a chance to study with Echazo and Naranjo did not realize to be our type, we all have both types. Now, I had done research before I knew that, and I noticed that people did have examples of both wings and both lines positively and both lines negatively, doing the 3-hour in-depth inquiry where we fool the superego and then I can ask questions and the little mini egos and the other types in the tritype and in the stacking can express themselves. Now, no one knows that's what they're doing except now because I say it in events like this. But having said that, it's kind of the smart, introverted 6 that's a thinking personality type that will identify as the 5. And they might say, well, I'm a 5 with a 6 wing. But the thing is that if you consider both wings, how is that the case? Well, I discovered that if we're introverts, we have a tendency to identify with the wing that we have that's more introverted than the other. And if we're extroverts, we naturally identify with the more extroverted wing. Now, above and beyond that, because I've done 24 studies now and I've been typing people for 40 years, I found that if we actually went a little deeper, what happens is that we might dress like one wing and we might internally identify with our more vulnerable wing. So that's a way we could look at it. The one we're more confident experiencing, it matches maybe our Myers-Briggs, or it might be that we just identify with certain qualities that we have inherently, like a talent, but a talent does not determine type. So, a love of music is not a character, it's a preference. To be able to play a piano or an instrument is something someone probably has a gift for, but they also had to work very hard to achieve it. So we have to leave all those out and instead look at the character. So that's why 5s always identify as 5s, and they never say, oh yeah, I thought I was this and now I'm certain I'm a 5. That's usually a 6 or a 9, because 5 and 9 are both withdrawn. types. They both use withholding as a defense strategy, but there's a huge difference. The 5 isolates to feel safe. The 9 doesn't want to isolate. They want to be comfortable and not have to be separate from others. So it's a very opposite defense strategy. But if you have both types in your tritype, obviously what's going to happen, it's very natural for the introverted 9 with 5 in the tritype and 3 to think they're 5s. But the minute they realize that they can physically stay where they're uncomfortable to not make waves, where the 5 can't, then they know that they lead with 9 rather than 5. And the 5 is one of the hysterical types, which are 2, 5, and 6. And what does that mean? That means when something catches them off guard, it's like a little kitten that goes. And so the 5 bristles and they're uncomfortable and they want to get away from it physically. Now, do they just leave showing that? No. If they have their way, they just slip away. Even with dear friends, if it's a group of people, they just want to leave, to take care of their need for more time alone. People say, well, I like to be alone. I like to be alone, but I am with people for 10, 12 hours a day. So what would I say if I wasn't coaching all day or working with people? As an extrovert, I still like people. I find people fascinating. I enjoy people. And on the questionnaire, if you were to ask me what I would have said before I created this questionnaire, I heard my whole life that, gee, Kate, you really like people. You want to know everything about them. You ask really adult questions. Now, I was just trying to figure out why people were lying. And I didn't mean like that they were bad lying. It was even white lies, like why they said they weren't mad when they were, why they said we could or couldn't do something and then didn't follow through. It was just all the concerns of a type 874. And someone else might love typologies and systems. But if you happen to have ENTP, INTP, INFP, and some of the other people study oriented analytical types, you're going to want to know all those details too. I'm just very overt about it. So when I've done different studies, in fact, the first study when I wasn't even aware of the Enneagram was that I had to work with so many different types of people at all levels. So I was an executive that went in like a fixer when there was a problem. I worked for Lancôme at this time, and they created a job around me, my skills, knowing typologies, where I'd go find out what the problem was, let's say with the Macy's chain or Bloomingdale's or iMagnums or whatever was around back in the 80s. A lot of them are gone now. But they wouldn't pass an order because they were overstocked. And they couldn't survive if they kept passing orders and they didn't have the sell through to balance it. But neither can a cosmetic company survive if there aren't regular orders. So because my boss was a 478, he said, Katherine, can you just go in and just create something for them? And you have an open budget, whatever you think they need, just as long as you get the order moving. You can reduce the order, you can do whatever you want. And 8s love that. And so I would go in and I'd be met with all this resistance, like I was going to force them to pass an order. And I go, no, I'm here to fix the problem. I'm a fixer. And they go, well, what can you fix? I said, well, I can identify what you're overstocked in and create ads for those products and custom ads for you, for your store, your account. And I can create a special event in your flagship store to create interest. And they go, oh, and then they'd start listening. And then I'd get the books and look at 20 stores and say, oh, okay, you're overstocked in these 8 items or 10 items. And so these are the ads I'm going to run. And they go, oh, wait, don't you have to get approval for that? I go, no, I have the approval to do whatever I want. Now, this is also in the 80s when at that level, they were all men. But I was dealing with men telling me, wait, you can do that? Yeah, I can do that. Do you want to run those ads? Oh, yeah. I go, okay, then I'll need to meet with your department that handles that. And I'll show you some ideas on the ads. So I had pictures and everything. But to my company, it was far superior to sell through than it was to not have an order passed. And as long as things are moving, it works for everybody. So I liked it because it was a win-win. But the point is, other types might go in and do quite well at that job. I was just lucky that the person who wanted me to have this job was a 478 and liked my style, the way I approach things on all three centers. And the head of Lancôme L'Oréal Cosmere, the umbrella company, was an 874. And when he first became the CEO, he came to a conference that we had, and then I gave a presentation on what I was doing. And then he came out to San Francisco and followed to see what I was doing. And he just said, no, you've got to go wherever we need you. And you got to move to New York, but I couldn't. So long story short, you can have competencies like the other types. But in the case of the 6, the only 6 that readily knows they're 6 from the beginning, and I see thousands and thousands of tests, and I now have seen them online for like 20 some odd years, 23 years. So I see them come in and they're rare, but they're really rare now. And why is that? Because the internet has people talking on social media about the types. And because they're incognito, they say pretty unkind things about each type, especially the 6 and the 8 and the 2. But there aren't many 2s on social media. 2s and 3s are lower in the typologies, but there are many, many 6s. In fact, in all my research, it was the 6 that was the most common type in typologies. But guess what? They thought they were 4s and 5s. So I still had that recorded, but then as I worked with people and then helped them understand that they actually were the smart, emotional 6, intuitive 6, then that changed those numbers. But if I say that number, people immediately go, oh, no, that's not right. But it is right. If we understand why, then we have a lot of grace for everybody. So the person who knows they're tracking hazards and they think everyone should be careful all the time, they're usually self-pres and a 6. So they might actually type as a 6. Occasionally, there are some exceptions, like atypical combinations might choose 6 cards. So if you have a type that has a line to 6 or a type that has a wing of 6 and you're atypical, and I often give the example of the atypical ENTP that is the 548 or 854 or 458, the way they make their selections will include aspects of type 6. And the test has been specially programmed to detect the patterns. And there are a number of them. It's not just one pattern that you change your mind along the way. That is an important one because 6 and 9 naturally do that because they're seeking balance. The primary types want to balance the issues of their wings. So what happens with type 7? Well, 6s have the most phenomenal sense of humor, and they can have a magical thinking that really seems like type 7. They could also be an ESFP, an ENFP. They could just be a really creative, magical thinking 6. But they have fears and phobias that the 7s don't have. And even if they're really extroverted, they know inside that they're still aware of how they could be at risk in some way. And they're trying to make sure they're not taken advantage of. And then 8 is a very, very, very common mistyping for the counterphobic 6, or the 6 who has learned that which type gets angry? I get angry, people are mad at me because I'll have outbursts. Oh, it's 8. Okay, I'm an 8. But I've had every Enneagram type potentially mistype as an 8. 8s don't mistype, by the way. They know what they are in the very beginning or within a day of learning about the Enneagram, because it's such a relief to 8 and 5 and 4 to have something that explains their internal world, because they're strong flavors that they recognize themselves. But if you happen to have a primary type, it's complicated. So, but if you, there can be other odd things. The 6 with the 7 wing with the 6-3-8 is the most common tritype. The 6-3-8 will always, always, always think they're an 8. And even if they learn that they're in many ways more 8 than an 8, and the 8-6-4 leading with 6 or 4 is more 8 than an 8, that they'll always mistype as 8s, but definitely the 8-6-3. But so can the 6-3-9, and it can vary distinctly. But the 7, we think of the ENFP, INFP, ESFP, ESFJ, all those combinations. But with the 8, it's going to be ENTJ, ENTP. And depending on the tritype, it varies. So the things that are bigger, because the 8 is thinking long range, bigger picture about what's vulnerable in the future. In fact, we don't even use the word vulnerable until we learn the Enneagram. Instead, we say weak. That's a natural thing to say. And the 6 is dealing with the immediate danger and what can go wrong, or the projected. Whereas the 8 is so long range that people think, yeah, that 8 is like talking about something that isn't needed. But yet it can actually end up being the problem, because they're definitely like battleship, long range. Even though they react immediately, they still are going to be inclined to be looking at the big picture, the long-term gain. Now, 5s do that in a more quiet way, and 8s do it more overtly. So everything I said about the 6-3-8 is for type 8. Now, the laid-back social 6 that has 9 in the tritype will always mistype as type 9. Sometimes type 2, then 9. So basically, all I'm saying is that you want to consider why you type for whatever your type is. And most people will start giving examples of what they do. And I just need to always remind people that the Enneagram is the only personality typology, not based on what you do. But you must have the idealized images, the core fears, and the defense strategy of the types in your type and tritype. So I've sort of mentioned these key points. We'll go into it more in the class to help 6s understand why they have trouble typing and often mistype. And it's just built into their defense strategy. They're meant to question and doubt, especially if it's going to be something important like the box you're putting yourself into. 6s do not want to be typecast. They do not want to be at risk. They don't want someone to know something about themselves that they don't know themselves. And so if they don't find their type, or people tell them that they don't have the right type, it's very distressing. It's the only type that gets anxious, sad, or really angry. I've had people take my test, and the test will notify them that they have 1 to 7 or more. It stops at 7 patterns that indicate they should look at type 6 and or type 9 in some cases. And they're furious. And they they email me, your test insisted I was a 6. Well, it doesn't actually say that. What it says is you should consider it and why, and not the details of the mechanics. So that's a good way to look at someone who's using projection as a way to be safe. So if something is mirroring to you, even though it's an inanimate object, that you're not who you want to be, then it's very stressful if you're a 6, because the 6 is trying to have confidence in all situations. And they can do in many situations, but they don't feel they can count on it. Now, any type can be a coward, but only type 6 is worried they might not be brave. And are they cowardly more than any other type? Not necessarily. The difference is, like as an 8, I know, given the right circumstances, maybe I'd be a coward. And I haven't quite done that yet, but I'm still open to that possibility. But usually I'll do something stupid and risky instead. But the 6 will have an attack of common sense and try to keep a positive rapport. So the 6 naturally just wants to blurt and say what upsets them. But if they do and someone pushes back, 6s are smart. They kind of backpedal or adjust to do what? To restore balance within the head center. So I need more of that, because my defense strategy is I'm my own authority, and I know what I'm thinking or feeling or believe I do. So I have more kind of a defense strategy of denial that it just goes out of my awareness if I'm vulnerable. Whereas it does not go out of the awareness of the type 6. They have to get big, assert, but then they go back down. Whew, they need to talk about it. And I could give you a million stories about how that's different. But just understand that getting angry has nothing to do with type. It's what are you angry about? Why does it upset you? And what just happened? And what's your crazy, irrational fear will happen if you carry on in the same vein. And that's key. Conflicting motivations, and this can happen if you have 2 types in your tritype that are opposites. And we have something in common with every type and something exactly the opposite of every other type. So some tests are organized that way, like the Ready, and you then have to choose, and you get a percentage for each type, a ranking for each Enneagram type. And basically, my test does that as well as track the patterns and gives you visuals and words and just sentences or collections of words and different ways of sorting to see what the overarching pattern is. So I talked about the intuitive and analytical strengths of type 6. The whole intuitive 6 was left out of the dissemination of the Enneagram. Now, I'm not saying with the Chazo and Naranjo, by the way. I'm saying those who didn't have a chance to study with them. And it makes sense because Naranjo learned from a Chazo and started teaching in 1971 in his private spiritual groups, Seekers After Truth. And he paid attention to what each type needed because you wanted to discover what was in the way of doing the deeper work, of seeing what you couldn't see about yourself. And the person that had the most difficulty was the counterphobic 6. So at that time, there was no counterphobic. It was just 6. So he kept having to explain how they deny their fear and go into it to get it over with because they can't stand the anxiety of having fear. Now, if you just add in intuitive 6s and you add them back in, many 6s will find themselves again, especially if they're intuitive and analytical. You can see why they might identify as a 5, and then they have both wings. There's many ways it can be explained. But here's the big one, fear of helplessness. Now, 6 and 8 are similar because neither one wants to be weak. Their big difference, though, is the 6 is looking for the strong other that will help them be safe or tell them what to do when they don't know what to do. Whereas the 8 doesn't look for others. We kind of expect that we have to be on our own. And we naturally just start physically doing things. We don't get lost in our head. It's not what we lead with. But if you're a head type, you're trying to figure out what you need to know or learn to be safe. And that includes finding smart people who might know what to do and have them in your life as friends, or have people that you invest with or do things with, have capabilities that the 6 doesn't have, to make sure they've got their bases covered. So the 6 has a fear of helplessness, meaning being on their own, and being abandoned, physically abandoned. That's another reason they mistype as 4s, because 4 and 6 have a fear of abandonment, not just 4. That was an incomplete dissemination of the Enneagram as well. Now, the 8, on the other hand, has a fear of powerlessness. It can sound the same, but again, it's the location of authority. Is it outside of you? Do you need someone to rescue you? Or do you just need the power to persevere and prevail? And that's more 8. But the main thing is this fear of fear itself. The reason 6s don't know they're afraid is because they're meant to be afraid to be afraid. And they can only observe it sometimes when they just notice what they get kind of controlling about. And they're usually controlling circumstances that feel like they're going to be caught off guard, they can be taken advantage of, that they don't know the best way to do something. And so they want to start controlling things so they don't have to face what? The fear that they don't know what to do. And whereas the 8's controlling, because anything in their environment, they want to know what they can count on. So if you move a pencil or the water bottle or something very simple that the 8 wants to know they can just reach for and have, it's really irritating. It's like you want to look at what the type is like normally, and then what little irritating things pertain only to that type. Then last but not least is identification with the underdog, and the 6 ability to have amazing courage and to be a hero when they least expect it. Now, some 6s have a tritype like 682 or 683 who are trying to be a hero or at least be that strong. But there's just like the 369 that just naturally will be a hero when the situation calls for it. But any 6, if they're cornered and are afraid, will become quite fierce in service of defending themselves. And that's why, because the adrenaline rises, it's so intense that they're going to do something. They're going to go into action. So even the part of 6 that can be paralyzed, if there's enough fear, that can happen, of course, but more often than not, there's going to be some sort of action or way in which the 6 does something they least expect. So Christmas one year, my teenage 6 came home from school, and my front door had a little window, half moon kind of window on it. And he was tall enough that he could look into the house and you could see the living room, through to the living room. And he saw someone under our Christmas tree handling our presents. And he flipped out. Now, he thought of himself as phobic, but he opened that door and said, "Give me my presents. Those are our presents." And the person went out the back door, broke the screen door, and ran away. But Brandon still didn't think he was courageous. I go, Brandon, some people would have gone and gotten a neighbor or, been afraid until the person left. He goes, but Mom, those were our presents. And I said, yeah, I know. And one time he was coming out of like a 7-Eleven, and it's when carjackings first started. And I had always told him when he drove, or even when he was a little kid, hey, you got a problem? You just drive to the police department. No one's going to follow you there. And he goes, really? But what if they tried to get me? And I said, well, they could, but it's the best place to go than any other possibility. And he never forgot that. So when this guy held up a knife to his window and said, give me your car, he already had locked his door the minute he got in. He'd done all the safety measures, locked his car, and he said, Mom said, just drive away. And he did. But he still thinks he wasn't courageous. Now, some people might have surrendered their car because they weren't willing to take that risk. So what I'm saying is, like, first he didn't think he was afraid of anything. Then he realized, oh, wow, Mom, you're right. I am afraid of everything, but I get to choose what I'm afraid of and not afraid of. And that's really social 6. So this heroism is pretty amazing in type 6, but they're a reluctant hero. Okay, so one thing I want to just very quickly go through is that we're talking about the 6 now, but obviously the head center has a need for reassurance, but their fundamental fear is of chaos. And what is chaos to a head type? Not knowing what to do given the circumstances. And what type is in the center of the head center? Type 6. So what type modulates their 5 and 7 wings? Type 6. And what happens? They have paranoia. So worst case scenario exaggerates what can go wrong. But the 6s prefer that, even though they think they don't. When 6s have worked on themselves for a long time and they learn how to deal with percentages and learn mind over matter, when they're not anxious, it feels uncomfortable. They're afraid because maybe there was something they should have been paying attention to that could go wrong and they wouldn't have been prepared for it. So when a 6 can understand they're meant to second guess, they're meant to pay attention to what can go wrong, and that they feel safer if they do, is hugely important for 6s. But all of them, even if they had a great childhood, and remember the Enneagram started out with the assumption of the new thinking of this late 60s, 68, 69, 70, is when things switched from everything being inborn, that you're born with certain characteristics. And then they started to realize, no, with all the twin studies where the kids that were adopted, they deliberately, with the adoption clinics and companies and facilities, they deliberately put identical twins and super twins in different families to see how it affected them. Now, they probably wouldn't be able to get away with that now. But so, for example, 3 boys were identical, super twins, triplets, and their life experiences were extremely different. But what traumatized them the most, but the happiest moment, is when they found each other. But then all the wounds they suffered surfaced in a particular way. Now, is every identical twin the same type as their twin? No. Now, commonly, I personally have worked with 20 twins, but some were the same type, but maybe they identified with other wings or a different instinct. And I thought, okay, that's adapting. But actually, I even had twins that were totally different tritype and instinctual stacking. I mean, identical. But this is where we have to look at what is nature and what is nurture. And nature is just that you're going to look at the world through the same lens, but how you respond to that issue will be based on your Enneagram type. But how you feel about what happened is going to be your identifications, which is the nurture part. So what we've learned over the years is it's nature and nurture. So why we're going to see the world the way we do as little infants growing up, and whether or not it was accepted. So for example, I had an 8 father that got a kick out of me. He said, I have 3 boys, but it's my daughter who gets the message. He did learn about the Enneagram a few years before he died. And I said, Dad, it's not that they didn't get the message. It's just they weren't the same type as you. The reason I got the message is I'm the same type. And certainly having 2 children, I could see the way my son, who's a 6, was not getting my messages. Whereas later, when I had an 8, he totally got my messages. And I knew more before he was born. In fact, I was pregnant when I learned about the Enneagram, and I'd known many typologies. So I was trying to figure out those variables. So then I keep talking about this idealized image, the core fear, and the defense strategy. You must have these for each type in your tritype to be this combination, no matter the order. So if we look at type 6, the idealized image is that they need to be friendly, engaged, dedicated, loyal, dutiful, responsible, some way that you earn either affection from others or they respect you, so you have a safe place to go. So even the most antisocial 6 will focus on social situations, who is doing what with whom, what the rules are, any kind of social hierarchies. And they'll say, oh, I'm not social, I hate society, but that's still social. So that's important. But don't worry about whether the word is dedicated, devoted, supportive. You will have a word that enables you to have the confidence of knowing where to go to get the support in an emergency. Or you may know a lot of different people, and like you learn about the Enneagram, and you're trying to type yourself, and you think you're a 5, but you ask everybody on the internet, and you ask all your friends, and they all give you different types, and you remain unconvinced by any. That's a 9, because they don't want to give up any of the types. 6, on the other hand, if you ask everybody, they're really not looking for your opinion. They're looking to see what you would choose and why. But what they're really looking for is someone who has know-how that agrees they're a 5. So even if 30 people say, you're not a 5, dude, you're not, they will still say, no, I am a 5 because I do this, I do this, I do this, and I do this. But what have I said? Nope, that's not how we type. But as I said, in a group, the way the Enneagram was disseminated for many years was with a group of people in real time. But that's what's hard about people trying to do this on the internet. Then the core fears, the fear of fear itself, being alone, blamed, and the tendency to submit. A lot of 6s don't understand that they have to have the energy to hold a stance. They have to prepare for it. They have to rehearse in their mind. The minute there's a problem, like my son, would come home and say, Mom, there's this kid on the bus that bullies everybody. And I said, does he bully you? And he says, no, but I know just what I'm going to do when he bullies me. And he had it all worked out, what he was going to say, what he was going to do. But if I had asked him, oh, have you rehearsed that? He'd go, oh, no. But you see, sixes do it so automatically, they have no idea that they're preparing for any eventuality to the best of their ability. And projection is he was assuming this guy was going to come after him. Well, he was right. And he did know what to say. But then he realized, oh, so all that worrying just made me more prepared when he was going to then bully me. And I said, yeah. And that's what I just need to always share with sixes. Okay, so most people come in with learning about the passion, fixation, and conviction, but what they don't understand is that you have to really know what these mean when you're using them to type yourself. And a lot of panels are organized around people talking about their fixation, and that's the mental preoccupation. And does that work? No, if you don't really understand what it means and you're still talking about your behaviors, the person hasn't understood. Like if I say to someone, oh, do you know what your primary fixation is? They'll say, no, but I do everything that this type does. And I go, what is it? And here's the thing. It's really helpful, in my opinion, to not try and type based on passion, fixation, and conviction until you know what they mean. And that's hard till you know your own type. But everybody can get to their idealized image, like how they want to be seen. So one of my idealized images is that I'm protected. I made a name for myself as a little kid by helping kids with bullies. So I was bullied when I moved to a school when I was 7. And my dad, as an 8, always said, okay, if you're ever bullied, just ask them when and where they want to meet. And he said, they won't show up. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And just be specific, the exact time. And it'll just throw, the person just being a coward off. So when these 2 girls that were bigger and taller bullied me because their friend liked me and wanted to play with me at recess, I said, okay, great. Where do you want to meet? The baseball diamond after school? And wait, should we meet at 2:35 or have an extra 5 minutes to collect our stuff and get here? And they go, yeah. And then because they didn't show up, and because I was the new girl with 90 kids, because it was baby boomers, it got around that if you're bullied, you just go to Kate. They called me Kate and Katie, Catherine, and she'll help you with the bullies. And then I'd go up to the bully and say, oh, so Alex, you want to bully Jessica? You want to fight Jessica? And they go, yeah, or I don't know. And I go, well, you're going to have to fight me. So where are we going to meet? And then I would just do that. So I never got in a fight, but it's more that my identification and self-image, that idealized image, is I protect people from being treated unfairly. So that's what you have to look for. So in the case of the 6, the fixation is cowardice. And people say, but I'm not a coward. No, but if you're worried you might be a coward or that you won't know what to do, that is having a mental preoccupation with cowardice. In fact, Echazo changed the name because 6s didn't like it, especially the counterphobic 6. I'm not a coward. And, they aren't, but they do worry about it. They're going to be rebellious. All head types are rebellious, but what are they going to be rebellious about? And then the passion is fear, and that's the fear of fear itself, which they don't see either. And the conviction is that you must align with others. And now it could be stronger others, it could be smarter others, it could be more successful others. Whatever the 6 has decided will keep them safe. Okay, we're not going to go into Tritype, but I just wanted to tell you that you can see this on katherinefauvre.com and locate where your Tritype is. because so the gut center is like the integrating tritypes. It's still 8, 9, and 1. And the heart center is still 2, 3, and 4. And the head center is still 5, 6, and 7. But what this maps is the unfolding of the tritypes and where they end up. So, for example, many 9s are up here in the integrating gut triad, but there's all kinds of combinations. The 1, 4, 5 is there, the 4, 7, 9. And people who meet a 4, 7, 9 immediately think they're a 9. Why is that? Because their energy is the most receptive energy of all. And they're very soft. They're willowy and fluid. They're not like rigid, like a 1, 3, 5 or a 1, 3, 6. So they have to constantly tell people, no, I'm actually the 4. And they are, but they just push down their need to be examining their own internal world and their self-absorption in favor of being safe and secure in the world. So, but they're up here with a lot of types that have 9 or, you know, common gut types, like, as I said, the 1, 4, 5 and the 4, 5, 8. But if you look down here in the 3 triad, they're not all with 3s. Like my tritype 4, 7, 8 is actually sitting on type 4. So someone who leads with 4, then 7, then 8 is the archetype of the messenger. And the most innovative tritype of all is this tritype because it's triple creative. It's the creative type in each center, creative problem solver, creative action, creative creations. But there's no 3. There's a 4 in there, of course, because it's on the 4 point. But it's very significant that you see where your tritype is. Because even the gentle 4, 6, 9 will say, wait, why am I on the opposing triad over with the head types? And it's because they overthink. It's because they're maybe thinking about all these possibilities, but they usually end up with focusing on what they oppose as opposed to what they are positively identified with. So they are the person in search of answers, but every time they find an answer, it's a new question. And once they understand that they're meant to keep going and kind of relearning and learning at a deeper and deeper and deeper level, then it makes sense to them. And they do have 9, so they have the ability to endure. But the 4 and 6 really want the answers. The 4 wants that personal expression. The 1, 4, 6 is also in the 6, but one that might be confusing is like the 1, 2, 5, because there's no 6 in the tritype. But again, this is a whole system. I do have free videos on tritype. There's one that I did not too long ago. I think AD interviewed me about something, and I ended up explaining a lot about how this emerged. So you can go find that there. I just want to get to the microexpressions. So type 6, when I was doing the research and everyone filled out that questionnaire, and those of you that have taken my test know that in the beginning, you're asked to list 5 words that you have as character traits, 5 words or adjectives, not who you could be, should be, want to be, or have recently become, but the overarching you that was there as a child and throughout your life. And that's very, very hard for 6 and 9 to do. They immediately start naming what they do again. And even when they learn this, they still do it. It's not a failing on their part. It's what they're hardwired to do. It's what we need them to do. So when I realized that it was uncanny how people that were total strangers gave the same words and collections of words that other people did from other parts of the world. And then I thought, well, it could just be that they all know the Enneagram, but here was the glitch. They were words that weren't used to describe the types. Like at that time, no one used the word tasteful for type 4. And the only person that used the word tasteful was type 4. So if I see that word, I'm going to think they might have 4 in the tritype. But now that it's out in the world, maybe not so much, because what happens as we're going through life, if we learn a word, like I was working with a client last night and we got to an 8 word that we just both loved. And why did we love it? Because it identifies an aspect of 8. So of course we wanted it. So if anyone notices a word that they like, they add it to their identity, their self-image. And this is all unconscious, but some of it we will consciously do. So what I did is I sent more questionnaires out, and I said, please get people who don't know the Enneagram before you ever try to teach them the Enneagram. Have them take this quiz as well, this questionnaire. And then I want everybody, those who know and those who don't know, to send me words, pictures, or phrases they identify with. And this is how these collages emerge. They're really a joint effort. I mean, it was a sexual 6 that gave this picture of femininity. It was a sexual 6 that gave this picture of the male masculinity. It was a phobic 6 who sent in the picture of going down the rapids with that, like into the fear. And his best friend was a counterphobic 6 who was not going to give in to the fear. And like people would have assumed someone that, wanted to be able to defend their rights would be an 8. No, they're more 6s than anything else. And in particular, self-pres 6, by the way, to be safe. But these pictures, if I went looking for pictures now on the internet, I could probably find a whole lot of great pictures. But if you consider that I started collecting these in 1994, then they're extraordinary. And so this is the foundation for where we're going to go from here. Like 1 6 thought that they were a 3, but then they realized they always had kind of scared eyes. So that's what we're going to go into next to see why. This picture up here with the 3 girls in black actually came from a high school trainee that was learning work experience at my office. And she actually helped me cut out these. Actually, I didn't do any of the cutting. People much more competent, my 1 friend, my 6th friend, and the little 6. And she goes, oh, I've got the perfect picture for you. And she put it in front of me. And I said, yeah, now it looks like you like to go dancing, but I don't think that's what you're trying to tell me. And she said, oh, no. She said, if I'm going out with my friends, I ask them what they're wearing, because if I'm put down for wearing like red and they're wearing red, then they're putting all of us down. And it felt safer to her. So she needed to know that her friends would naturally back her up if she was criticized for something. So if she matched her friends, and she had 2 best friends, that's why there's 3 of them, and that was just a really important factor. And she happened to have the sexual social combination of the 6, 3, 8. So she was fierce, but she still wanted to have that group support. And people say, well, that's only the social 6. No, it's not. The 6 holds the position of others in the Enneagram. The heart types show the initiating factor. The head types show the opposing factor and what to watch out for. And the 9 is the integrating factor. So all these are all on my website. You can go study it. And actually, there are patterns within patterns. And I have a class where all I do is talk about why people sent these pictures and all the hundreds of people, thousands now, that have seen these pictures that commented on them before I taught them, which was just amazing and why here I am 31 years later, still loving all this research. Okay, so most of you know how I teach the sixes. There are many different words, and you can find this, especially if you've taken the test. You can just go to the PDF and download these free handouts. But the most important thing I want to highlight is the phobic avoids perceived hazards and the counterphobic faces them to get the anxiety over with. But they both have anxiety. How do you deal with it? And the strength that gets lost with these people that are unkind to the six is how loyal and faithful they are to the people they've chosen. Now, some are just loyal to everybody, but they usually have a tritype that has two in it. But it's like they have values and beliefs which they're committed to, and it's different for each six. And the sixes always said they were loyal till the internet, and then people put down sixes saying they were loyal. So that's why sixes say, oh, I'm not sixes, I'm not loyal. I'm not a six because I'm not warm. I'm not six because I'm not pragmatic. I'm not six. And then give all these reasons, but they'd have too many reasons. And I'd say, but what would happen if you did do that? What would happen if you were loyal? They would have no answer, you see, because it wasn't their real fear. Their real fear was being taken advantage of. So bear with me on this. But then the weakness is that each type will fall into a response of relating. And in the case of the six, it's magnifying worst case scenarios, which is like going and watching a horror movie where you want to be scared. Some sixes love horror movies, the best. And then other sixes hate them because they'll then have dreams about whatever they saw, even though they know it's just a movie. But it could even be like going to Jurassic Park when that came out. I took my boys the last day of school. I'd gotten tickets and I took them, and they just jumped out of their seats with the first scary scene, which is like a dinosaur coming after you. And that's a natural instinct. But the same thing happened with Jaws, the movie. Like once you realize that the shark was just a mindless creature and had that ability to just get you in a certain way, there was popcorn and drinks flying everywhere. So that's a human response. But my son, who was a six, said, oh, Mom, I hate to be scared, but I love to be scared. Why is it both? Well, because the six always sees the other side of everything. And that's why they're the devil's advocate, because they're meant to point out something very out of balance. Why? Because anything completely out of balance is potentially a very serious threat. So if someone's just absolute about a topic, the six will question it. The six will try making it more in the middle. And the more someone is overly confident, the scarier that is to a six. Now, they might not use the word scary, but that's what their defense strategy is afraid of. Someone that's going to do something without thinking that could be a problem for everybody. Okay, now we're into the part you want to learn about. In the course, we are going to go more in depth on the expressions themselves, but sixes, you can begin to see your own six just by recording on Zoom. You can just think of a couple questions you want to ask yourself and then record it and answer. And you'll see every expression that I'm talking about. Now, some face shapes lend themselves to developing some muscles more than others. Strong structure in the jaw is 8. So if someone is like this, yeah, I'm an 8. Yeah, no, they're not. Because it's a physical way the energy moves through the body. Now, if someone broke their neck and they were like this with their chin back, yeah, they could still be an 8. But they're not going to be like this and make a big deal about being an 8. Why? Because the 6 And the self-pres that has a very strong self-pres will always identify with 8. And the 6 with the tritypes I gave you the example with will always identify with 8. So they know they're strong, but what they're doing is reacting to the stress of what causes them concern. And that's a very different thing. And the reason I learned microexpressions is because my son, when he was born in 1976, I had for him a new pediatrician who just finished his residency and was very progressive. As it turns out, he was a 9, and 9s are quite progressive until people don't really appreciate them being progressive. But he gave me a piece of paper, 8.5 by 10, with little faces in a circle with expressions. And he said, you know, Katherine, you seem like a progressive person. You're wanting to do all these things pretty differently and openly. He said, I thought you might like this. This guy, Paul Ekman, said that people have microexpressions, and in particular, the babies can communicate before they can talk. And so he showed me all these faces, which were little baby faces. I should have it up here. Little baby faces of all these expressions. And when a baby spits out their food, it looks like contempt. One side of the face is kind of up. When something doesn't smell good, we all have disgust. These lines are amplified, just like our head goes back and our nose goes up. And when we're angry, this comes more like a V, and we can have 2 lines or multiple lines. It's different based on our structure, but the eyes narrow, they go in and focused, not diffuse, but targeted. And so he's showing anger, and the mouth is usually tighter, or it could be gritting of the teeth if it's an 8, where you just, my dad was mad at us as kids. He would say, you idiot, but he'd never open his teeth. So we knew we'd done something really dangerous, because he only said that when we, you know, played with matches or did something, you know. And I did set my room on fire playing with candles because I wanted to play Peter Pan. But anyhow, all that aside, he didn't tell me I was an idiot then, because it was pretty horrifying to have my room burned down. But I had one candle in the window, like they did on Peter Pan, and I was 5 years old, and I had one candle that I was walking around with. Now, I wanted the little candle holder, which I now inherited. My mom wouldn't let me play with it. And my brother just had his first communion, so that's how I got the candle, from him and his best friend. But my mom took them away from me, but I figured out where she put them, and I crawled up and climbed up and got them and thought, I'm just going to go play by myself. And the one in the window fell because it was a communion candle. It was like this long. It wasn't like a short little candle that had a flat bottom. And then the curtain caught on fire and it dropped on the bed. And I was underneath the bed pretending I was on an adventure. So having said that, there is just the expressions that we show based on this structure. Now, because I tend to kind of do a lot of disgust, or if I can't quite see at a distance, I will squint my eyes. Sometimes people think I'm mad, and all I'm doing is concentrating. And that's very common for people that are 8s, because we have a straight mouth, or it turns down actually at the corners, rather than turning up like this, just like this. So what's your natural resting face? And so I've done years of collecting pictures of students and people smiling and not smiling, and what happens to the muscles when we're not smiling or scared or angry, when we're just neutral. And the 2s still seem approachable, and the 6s still seem curious, and the 8s seem kind of scary. And some of the other types that have features like 8s, or 8 in the tritype, might as well. But Tim Roth is a counterphobic 6. He was the perfect person to be in this TV series, Lie to Me, that was based on the work of Paul Ekman, who's also a 6. And it's amazing because 6s use every emotion every day, all day. So guess who's the very best at doing all these emotions? People who are 6s. It's not by chance. But the main thing is some expressions just show up more commonly with each Enneagram type. Now, anyone can get angry, but this is what a counterphobic 6 that has the priest archetype, chiseled features, looks like when they're angry. And this is what this archetype looks like when they're happy. Now, I don't know how to be happy with my mouth closed. I just, even if I'm by myself, I'll be smiling. But some people, they just pleasantly smile. Now, I think he has the 638 example. He was always good playing a character that people underestimated, and then he was very able to just overpower a situation. But he always played roles that were quite glib. And Paul Ekman would go to people and like get in their face to see what they did, and then he'd know if they were being deceptive or not. And disgust is easy to see. Now, 6s usually don't look normal with disgust. He does not look normal. Instead, what you'll see with 6s is contempt, which is one side of their mouth. I look like an idiot when I do it. My dad would say, "You idiot, you don't do contempt, you do disgust." But it's just like, it could even be like a half smile. And what's important to understand about contempt is that we all use it, but if we can't say what we mean or mean what we say, most of us will just show it, even if we don't know it intellectually. Now, I can sometimes feel contempt when I talk about a particular experience. And even though I'm talking about it neutrally, I'll go, oh, I guess I feel contempt for myself and the way I handled that. Because it doesn't mean you feel contempt for the other. But most times it's contempt for whatever the other is stimulating in your consciousness. Then sadness is diffuse eyes, like, and looking down as opposed to inward or outward. It's being internalized. And it can be pretty subtle with some types, but it's just usually the marked difference in that 6s are very animated. Even the most introverted 6 has animation, even if they're just tiny little gestures. Because what Paul Ekman found at a time when the presiding belief was we learned our expressions from the mother or the caregiver. And he said, wait a minute, there are emotions and expressions that are innate. And when they found the tribes in the Amazon that had never been exposed to Western newspapers or anything, a lot of the cultural anthropologists and researchers and psychologists wanted to do some evaluations and testing to understand. And he has pictures of people that will show in the 6th class that he couldn't speak their language. He had to have a translator, but he asked them what they were feeling when they made a certain expression. And the person might say, well, I was happy, well, I was angry, I was thinking, oh, I was confused. And then he knew that it was real. But what he also found was that someone that was blind at birth, who never seen a caregiver, had expressions that were universal. So he identified 7. Some people before him thought there were 6. And when that Inside Out came out, which he was the expert that they used, they combined contempt and disgust. They are different, though. Contempt, as I said, is always one-sided. Disgust is even. And the one has contempt where the brow can come up and like looking down, like a hawk eye. And Paul Ekman's daughter, also a 6, and she could do all the faces. Now, she grew up with her dad, and so that would be natural. But as I mentioned, the 6 is the most identified with what they want to conceal, but does not realize that they need to be a 4 to have emotions. And the other thing is that we have many, many actors that are 6s, leads. They might have different tritypes, but we like them. They're funny, they're affable. And until they learn mind over matter, they're amazing. And when they learn mind over matter, they feel more confident. So it works out both ways. So now when I was working with Alessio and many others, as I've taught classes, I always give Amelia Clark as an example of a 6. Now, she played kind of a fierce 6 as the mother of dragons, but you can just search YouTube for Amelia Clark expressions, and she can move every part of her face separate. Now, I can't even do this side. I got to do it with my finger, or to make my brows do this and go up and down all at the same time, like she's doing. I have to hold it there. I can raise my right eyebrow like this, but I can't do all the independent movement. And so if you watch this in real time, which we couldn't put on here, but you can go watch it, it's just such a perfect example, because she can look sad, she can look like questioning, or she can look like she's looking down on someone. But when you see every face, then it explains a lot. And surprise is when the eyes, both brows are up, like, what? No, really? Are you sure? And it's just this movement that you really have to see on a lot of faces. But in real time, it's memorable. And clients would come to me and say, Katherine, you have to help me. People say that I'm not a good team player, that I'm disapproving. And I'm not. I'm just thinking about how hard it's going to be for me to do a new project, a new way. And then, of course, the boss was often a 7 who wanted everyone to be all excited. And the 6 would be thinking about what could go wrong. So I had to teach their manager that 6s are meant to think of every possibility. And doesn't mean they don't like what the boss is unrolling, but they're just trying to consider how it's going to impact them and if they're going to be able to do it. And then that solves a whole lot. But I teach them mind over matter so that they don't have people unfairly judging them. But it's a double bind for a 6, because the defense strategy says don't inform people about the ways in which you feel vulnerable, and don't disclose who you are until you meet someone else who's going to say they're scared too. And because then 6s open up. Like if it's a big meeting and 6s had to attend, they didn't come with anybody, and they're kind of anxious, and then they're supposed to group and they don't know where to group. One 6 under their breath usually will say, oh, I hate things like this. I never know what group to go to, but they voice it out loud. And then another 6 will say, you know, I don't either. Let's be in the same group. Now, they're often the extroverted 6, but having said that, still they voice it because it feels better to say it. So when working with 6, you want to always understand that if they can talk about what stresses them out, they can get it out of their head. Now, it may show up again or go around and around, but if they don't talk about it, it's going to be faster, more difficult, and problematic. I mean, I've even had to suggest to 6s that have to say it to just go in their car and say it, say whatever's confusing them, they're angry about, they're scared about, they're upset about, and then go back inside. And then it's easier for them. Some would go into the bathroom, and then there might have been someone in the same that they wouldn't have wanted them to hear what they were saying. So having said that, the 4-6-8. So the way we're going to do this now is I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the collage. Now, initially, these collages started with my very dear friend, Joanne Finizzo, where she took all the pictures from the 9 collages that pertain to a type, like in this collage, 4 pictures, 6 pictures, and 8 pictures. So they were there, and she set it all up for me. And then people from the community, and by this time we had the internet, because this was probably about, we made the Tritype collages, I think in 2008. And she helped me with the first collage. She's a 152, and she just like the expert cutting and very patient. And it's just pretty extraordinary. Anyhow, then the pictures that came in from people who'd never seen what we were making fit in beautifully. And then after I had the basics, I would do a Zoom call, or then it was Skype, with people that would look at this, that had this Tritype. And I was certain they had the Tritype. They had already had sessions with me and had time to confirm it. And then we'd try to figure out the name of what they wanted to be called. And they would each come up with a great name, but if it wasn't something all 3 types would accept, it went by the wayside. So in the case of the 468, they knew they were electric, they knew they were intense, they knew they were complicated, complex, and like a spider's web is strong, but it's also very frail with anything big. They knew that they were rebellious. They wanted to blow the whistle on people that weren't being honest or telling the truth or being up forward because of the 6 in there. And 6 and 8 do not want deception, and neither does 4. So when you have 3 types that are aligned in wanting the truth, and they're in a tritype, it's amplified. And when it's amplified, that's what you see, which is why people often mistype the 6s as 4 or 8. They might even have 4 and 8 in their tritype and then give themselves the 5 or the 7 rather than the 6. In my work with this tritype, I find this particular tritype the direct and intuitive 6. And I really mean it when I say it's the most reactive, creative, and feelingful 6. They're expressive. They are gonna blurt, but they also can talk about their deeper feelings. Now, my younger son is the 846. And when he was just like a little guy, I was teaching my boys about how to have emotions because they weren't allowed in my family. And so how to work through a problem. And then I'd ask each of my sons what they were feeling when they got into the conflict or whatever happened. And my little 846, when he was like 4 and 5 years old, could totally articulate his feelings. I was just like, wow, how did you learn that? He goes, well, Mommy, you told me. You taught me. I go, not like that. I can't do that. But it was just noteworthy. But he's an ENFP. And actually, I'm going to be doing a free event with him next month, the end of next month, on using the instinctual subtypes in relationships. But having said that, they seem like 8s, but they're just more emotional. They're funnier, because you bring that 6th lead and you get a funny person. But they can have this heroic nature, but kind of some phobias about different things. But because they are the type with the line of intensity 4 and 8, with the type that is between 4 and 8 in terms of the center that is most identified as being intense, which is 6, and oppositional, they are the greatest example of this. Go ahead, AD.
Sure thing, Kat. So a good example of the 648 is, in my opinion, Jennifer Lawrence. Now, several people who want to type her a 4 or an 8. Now, we can notice that Jennifer has the artisan warrior close. So she has the graceful feature of the artisan, which usually, if we stereotype as 4, visually, and also the warrior, which is often stereotyped as 8. She's actually a 6 with the 4 and the 8. She is known for example, portraying characters like Katniss Everdeen, Hunger Games. She also played in a Lady Heroine Kinda role with Chris Pratt in Passenger, for example. You can see how she is a 6 that tend to blurt a lot, and also she doesn't have the nonchalance you typically see in an 8. So, for example, she had an incident where she slipped and she was all embarrassed about it, whereas an 8 would have just joked it off. Yeah.
Yep. And, if you think about the characters she played, as AD mentioned, they're very fierce characters. And she was also playing a self-pres version. Like she wasn't into romance. She was in being safe, protected, and what you had to do to survive. But even under extreme circumstances in the Hunger Games, she still could not go against what she felt she should do, and like couldn't kill someone unless they were trying to kill her. So there'll always be some value or quality in all 6s where it's extremely important to have your values, even if you get upset and do something you wish you didn't. And like when she received her Academy Award, and people felt sorry for her, and she goes, "No, don't be sorry for me." She's got that counterphobic quick response. And whenever 6 is combined with 8, it always is counterphobic. So she's such a great example. But her versatility is very definitely 6. She usually plays like someone that's strong because she does have the warrior archetype. You can see it in the neck and the shoulders. But because she's the pretty artisan combination, then she had a lot of possibilities to be in a lot of different movies. Okay, 368. So I've talked about the 368. Yeah. Joanne told me that we actually made these collages in 2010 for the book. You are correct. I remember. They all said 2008 years ago. So maybe I started the concept or something. I'm not sure. But look at the 368. Okay, you have the guy, open season on banks. You've got the finesse of wanting to be attractive. So that would be the expression of the 3. The victory pose. I mean, what was so great about these collages is that to find a football player with a 3 on his jersey with the victory pose is exactly the archetype that the 3 wants to be. And, the ants, like being busy, 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 that's the 3. And the 6 has ants in their mind when there are thoughts that are plaguing them. And then they're skeptical, but they're going to know everything about what they're skeptical about. And the sharper image was a great example of a catalog focused on having the persona of the image of type 3. And what's kind of like, there is a 6 that's kind of like the knight, that we think of the knight as a number of different types, but the warrior 6 is very much the knight, let's say shining armor, but any armor. A lot of martial arts people, a lot of the mixed martial arts have counterphobic 6s and 9s and 3s most commonly. But there's just this part where they see themselves as bossy too. So you can see another reason why they think that they're 8s at first. The 3 does as well, by the way, not just the 6. Because all the descriptors that were just the very shallow description of type 8 in 1970 were kind of used, and there are some groups that don't know anything past 1970 and are still using those descriptions. So of course they're going to identify with 8. And actually, the 368 is the most perfect example of 8 because it's got the triple fierceness. The 3 and 8 are aggressive types. The 6 and 8 are reactive types. any way you organize these, you're going to have someone that takes their proficiency of 3, their ability to test their mettle, like the 6, and their natural response to life, like type 8. And in a way, they're going to take no prisoners. But what is important to understand is that this tritype also calls off when people are not honest about what's going on. But they prefer to work as a team, even if they're not social. They like being in small groups of people you can totally count on when they're 6. And I gave the example, my son with the 8, 4, 6, it softens the 8. But the other way around, with the 6, it makes them stronger. With the 4, it makes them stronger. Now, 3 is already strong because they're going after their goal one way or another. But the pictures that they sent, like the little girls, like defying one another, going definite, having the something coming out of the computer. I mean, because 6s have the most wonderful sense of humor. But then the questioning, like, okay, what do I believe? Is this person right or is that person? They're different answers. And then now that people have the internet, they go on the internet and it's like you ask a question and then you think, oh, okay, everyone's saying the same thing. That must be true. Wait a minute, it's exactly the same. So it's all from the same source. So is it true? Is it not true? And how do I know what's true? So the 3, 6, 8 pushes to understand this, but you always see scales with 6 because the 6 is always balancing the pros and cons to everything. And you're meant to do that if you're a 6. But the roar is more like an expression that this tritype identifies with more, as well as the howl. This was sent by a 6 in that first study. And what it says in the small print is wolf pups howl just for the sake of howling. But actually not. They're learning how to communicate. But if you consider this was 1994, they hadn't done all the research where there was a couple, primarily a man, but a couple that lived right on the edge of the territory of a wolf pack. And they learned tons of things. They don't howl. It's all practicing for adulthood. And this guy with the Mustang, where he's wearing jeans, white shirt, sunglasses, and a convertible, is safe. And 6s, even now, no matter what the fashion is, they find the safe version so they're not going to be kind of projected upon or at risk. Or they go the other extreme, have a mohawk or what have you. But I can pretty much assure you that they have friends that have a mohawk. And I've shared examples of that working with teenagers in private high schools where I didn't even teach them the Enneagram. I had them begin with a collage. And this one teen had a yellow mohawk. And he thought, oh, I must be the 4 when we got to type 4. And I said, okay, why? And he goes, well, because I have a yellow mohawk. No one else does. And I said, but why do you have a yellow mohawk? And it was, well, my friends have mohawks. See, that's a very different reason than a 4 would choose. You got to be different from your friends, not the same as your friends. And I said, okay, tell you what are there, 4 or 6 of you? And he goes, yeah, how did you know? Well, because the groupings work best when there's 4 to 6. But then I said, if they all shave their mohawk, would you shave yours? And he faltered. And he said, I'd have to. And I said, why? It was the same reason with the 3 girls that were all in black dancing. Because safety and security comes from grouping, even if you're not a social subtype. The mask is the 3. So as I said, these are all wonderful to study independent of what we're doing today. I saw this as the direct focus 6. And I've talked a lot about this justice fighter, meaning that this type goes the distance. They're going to be comfortable. They're going to be confrontational. So sometimes people say, oh, if someone's confrontational, they're an 8. No, not necessarily. as eights only confront when there's something that we believe is not true, and that in some way it'll impact others, and we'll want to call it off, especially when we're younger. But sixes might sense there's something and want to find out there's something and push. So that's a huge distinction, but they're always the really tough, fierce kind of terrier type energy to the six that will go against big business as an attorney. They'll look out for the underdog. They want to show their strength and make things fair for everyone, especially if they're social.
As potential exemplar for this Tritype, I present here Aubrey Christina Praza. She happens to be my favorite actress. She's absolutely hilarious. You will see that she has, like Jennifer Lawrence, the beautiful, pretty fluid traits of the artisan, with Sage as well in the mix, which is more like a theatrical mask. Like,
yeah, funny. Yeah.
yeah, she usually plays very strong characters. Counterphobic sissies, a Tish character, kind of similar like Jennifer Lawrence in that sense. She tends to blurt a lot, like Jennifer, but she's actually as the free. She also talks about, for example, how she works hard and play hard, among other things. She played, for example, characters such as in Parks and Rec's April Ludgate, Religions with the Shadow King, and most recently she played as Rio Vidal, Lady Death in Agathor Along. So all strong characters, like counterphobic 6-ish, 8-ish kind of traits. One interesting thing about her, she's very sensitive, but she disowns her sensitivity. So you can see, for example, that when she's in an interview talking about Parks and Recs, she was about to cry. She was like trying to desperately hiding it, like from the
Yes.
cam. Yeah.
Yes.
Which,
Yes.
in my opinion, represents very well how this Tritype tend to disown that sensitive part of themselves.
Yeah, because even if they've learned mind over matter, the only way to get away from those tender feelings is to be inherently a sociopath, because sixes are very sensitive to the experiences of others and how they feel in relationship to others, that they're always measuring it. And they feel vulnerable and they don't like other people being made vulnerable. But on the other hand, if it's them or the other, they prefer to band together. Again, more like seems social, but it's just a survival strategy of six. But yes, great example. And do you know what he means by the artisan? It means the kind of the big, beautiful eyes that are soft and the features that are pretty. And whereas the warrior is more like my young pictures, when I was like winning tennis tournaments at 9, 10, 11, and 12, I had, the big muscle. Even though I'm all tore back now, I still have the muscle from having played tennis for so many years. The thing to be aware of is that quality endures. So if you have 8 in the Tritype, there'll be something grounded. So even though she's sensitive and couldn't conceal it, then she still has that natural sensitivity that we love in sixes, but sixes often hate that they can't conceal it.
I had that in one occasion she was in an interview in a TV show, and one friend of her from Parks and Recs started to highlight how sensitive, how kind she is in personal life, and she started to, let's say, send the friend to go to another country in front of everyone because she didn't like it.
She didn't want to talk about it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's how 8 in the Tritype. Perfect. 3, 6, 9. This is the most universal 6. It's the second most common type in terms of the 6 itself, but because 9, there are more 9s than 6s. But this is the most adaptable, sensitive, caring, success oriented in the right circumstances, but you can't be too driven because that could be off-putting, which the 9 wouldn't like. And the 6 wouldn't like it if people then wanted to go after them because they came on too strong. So there's this universal quality with the 3, 6, 9. Now, when they lead with 6, and if they're counterphobic, let's say, they will share that they feel like anything is telling them that they're just not strong enough or tough enough to do something. So like I might use the word tough to describe myself, but it's not that I think I need to be tough. I just am. And I could do it naturally as a little child. It wasn't like I had to really rehearse like my elder son. It was more like my younger son, where we just were tough little kids. And what happens is like one sexual 6 who was counterphobic said that he was climbing a mountain. He was very physical, like doing all kinds of outdoor activities. And that there was a part where you weren't supposed to climb the top of that mountain. It said danger and, not allowed. And he felt like the mountain was saying to him, you're just a chicken. You're just afraid to climb it. Like, who's going to see if you climbed it? And that's really important to understand about type 6 is you can feel provoked by inanimate objects, just like occasionally the 6 who's upset that the test suggests they might want to look into type 6, and they're really upset with the computer program. And it's like anything that mirrors to you that you're not strong enough, or that you could be a coward, or that you're afraid to do something is very uncomfortable in the body of the 6. Now, some 6s are so used to it, they don't expect anything different, but they want to be polished. They want to be likable. They want to be the everyman, the neighbor that's likable, the friendly parent, the friendly friend, that's always kind of making sure everybody is happy and going along to get along and doing things together is this tritype. It's very rare for this tritype to feel happy if they aren't in one way or another with the people that they value, whether it's coworkers or whether it's their intimate bond or they just have their stuff. Now, the self-pres in this tritype can think they're an 8 if they have the very strong, tall self-pres, and sexual and social are lower. Okay, so what I said about this tritype is it's the most accepting and focused 6. So this type of 6 is focused like anytime 3 shows up, but it brings the 9 to the 6. So the 6 is already what it is. The 2 types in the tritype then modify the 6. And as I said in the beginning, whatever they share in common becomes their focus of attention. And the areas that are singular, that pertain to just one type in the tritype, they're diminished. They never go away. They just seem eclipsed. But this is the type most inclined to say it depends on the situation, because all 3 types are modifying or adjusting their behavior given the circumstances at hand. And they really have trouble. Am I 6 or am I 9? Now, 3s usually know they're 3s because of all the terminology, but they don't know their other 2 types in the tritype. But if someone has all 3, they get so frustrated trying to type. As I said, unless they have people they trust that guide them to their tritype, and it also resonates. But even then they might say, well, I just worked with someone recently that had learned about their type, went through many different types. First, someone told them they were a 6, and then they negated that. They could point out what wasn't them that was written. And then they tried on different types. And then they finally found, after all that they were still the 6 with the 7 wing and the social. And yet This man said he still always questioned, well, I wonder if I'm really a 6. And that's perfectly normal. But with this tritype, it's even more so because the rebelliousness is kind of more subtle. And this 6 is avoiding trouble most of all. If they're going to do something that can get them in trouble, they're going to be really good about being able to conceal it because they don't want to be in trouble for any reason. AD?
Okay, here is a potential example. I present Alexandra Valeda Botex. Botex Live is her YouTube channel. She co-hosts that YouTube channel together with her sister Andrea Botes. Now, what is interesting with Alexandra Botes, or Alex, her nickname, is she has 6s free very close. In her channel, she peacock the free, but if you pay closer attention, she's actually a 6. Just that the free is very close. She likes to peacock the professional attitude of the free more. Also, she has the priestess sage combination, the priest, which is symmetrical, which is the stereotype of the free. So several people will think she's a free at surface level, unless you do your due research to actually dig in her motivation. Several people want to desperately give her the 8. However, she doesn't have the 8 in her tritype. She's utterly triple adaptive, and you can notice how adaptive she is. And many people, what they do, they cherry pick the moment that she gets pissed stream because her sister interrupts her when she's playing a match. So she starts to get flustered, like as she screams at the cam, etc. However, if you pay attention, for example, and you see her close to Andrea in the video where she go talking about is the college worthy from Andrea, you will see the difference because Andrea is much more assertive than Alexandra. It is a matter of fact, when they are close, Andrea start like to talk about other people, this and this, extremely blunt, and then there is her go like, oh, Andrea, what, Andrea? Sorry, but that's not someone 8 fixed her. Yeah, that's 9. Additionally, she likes to narcotize herself by reading One Piece books. There is some videos that you can go, you can find that on Meme Jam in her channel of Alexandra getting triggered at Andrea because Andrea stole her books for the RDJ set. So that's an example of what she actually likes to use for narcotization. So she's actually 639. Additionally, she tried to save extensively an X space in a stream. Like she stayed like 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And she, in my opinion, more the social, for example, she returned together with a person just to meet Carlos Mañas, the world champion.
Yeah, chess is intense. And, you know, we'd probably put her at the INTJ or...
I think that Alexandra Botes is actually an ENFP. She got in a test ESTP apparently, or similar. I think that's her being neurotic. EXP is sort of in the test that in the way.
Yeah.
And the persona she put is ENTJ, in my opinion.
If you need to identify as a smart person, I'd find that 6s will choose like TJs, especially if they're orderly and get things done. And if they don't really understand the Myers-Briggs types, like if you don't really understand the Enneagram types, you can make false equations. But yeah, but she's the archetype of the 6 with the longer face, with the sharp features, chiseled features, but with that smile that can, even with a closed mouth smiling, I can't even make do
Yeah,
that.
her persona would be NTJ free.
Yes, excellent. Okay, the 136 I've kind of referenced throughout the day. It's the person that wants efficiency and appropriateness and the way things should be, and having the best morals and manners, at the same time questioning the motivations of others, but needing to achieve and accomplish to give a feeling of safety, certainty, and security. So when this tritype is led by 6, it's the very taskmaster kind of 6. It's the person that's tracking everything. There you can see the little ants again. Whenever 6 and 3 come together, there's just a need to be busy to avoid the feelings that cause anxiety. In fact, some people with this tritype can't just sit and watch a movie. They have to be doing something else at the same time, because even when they're watching the movie, if they have high anxiety, it can bleed through and interrupt enjoying the TV show. If they're in a theater, it's a little better because they're not going to be as inclined to stop and do something else that comes up. But they report that even in the movie theater, they can have 2 reels running, the one watching the movie and the other one saying, oh gosh, I better do this when I get home because I'll forget to do it tomorrow and I need to have it for Friday. And kind of getting their mind to just focus on one thing is difficult. Now, the sexual can do it more simply because what they'll be focused on is the other. So if they're with the other watching the movie and they want to watch the movie too, they have a better ability to do that. But if they're self-present or social, they're just do. And I mean, really do. Like any free moment, they've got to read something, watch something. They can't just relax like the 9 can. So I see this type as the discerning and focused 6. Now, what do? They mistype as 1s or 3s. Because remember, 6s don't see their own type. If they're going to see it, they're usually the 6 that has the 9 and 3. But they're going to be highly responsible. If they decide to do something, they're very diligent and thorough, like a 1. They are taskmasters like the 3, and they've got the 1 in addition with the 6 that wants to get it right and not make a mistake. Then you have someone that's going to go out of their way to achieve their goals. But the other side of it is if they stop and aren't doing something in a procedural way, in a disciplined way, what happens? Those negative thoughts and feelings arise and they feel stressed out. But if they're running or reading or writing, and so they're often very good on YouTube. If they are an influencer, like this gentleman is a therapist and a coach, and he knows a lot of other modalities, and he's done a lot of videos on different personality disorders, and he's got it down to a science, and he's proficient, and it'd be very, very easy to think you were 1 or 3. But again, once the 6 realizes they're actually a 6, it's a relief. Then you can start to laugh at yourself. You can make sense of what you felt bad about and realize, yeah, I didn't need to feel bad. That's what I was supposed to be doing. Just the person who didn't like it, they're not supposed to be doing that. They're very discerning and focused. Anything you would say on that, AD? You chose him.
Yeah, you can watch him in panel 6. He also had an interview with Kat, so you can watch more of his triple industriousness exemplified in the video there.
Actually, you're right, because there's one video where he's interviewing me.
Yeah.
And for his YouTube channel, and there's another where I'm interviewing him as a professional 6 who uses the Enneagram.
Yeah, and I add that he makes, for example, content like spiritual warrior kind mindset, and also made plenty of content talking about, for example, strategy against narcissist.
He's very, very knowledgeable too. If you want to learn about those problems, you'll find him on YouTube. So the 469. Okay, here's the tritype that has even more trouble than the 369. And why? Because there's the adaptability of the 6 and 9 and the indecisiveness mixed with the 4 that has self-doubt. So the 4 has self-doubt, the 6 doubts themselves and others, and the 9 has the believer-doubter dichotomy, meaning first they believe wholeheartedly in something, but then the minute they find a flaw, they throw the whole system out again. Remember, the 9 sees all points of view, but remains unconvinced by others. So any tritype that has 9 in it will naturally take longer. If they lead with 9, it's quite remarkable if they find themselves early on. They're usually self-aware. Now, I will say that 4s naturally want to be self-aware, so they might know themselves pretty well. And 6s are just really aware of themselves, but it isn't until they stop looking at behaviors that they're aware of, but look at the motivations underneath those behaviors, then they get it really quite fast. But like the 4, 7, 9, they're very kind of dreamy and ethereal. There's a gentleness. They still question and doubt. And as I said earlier, they go in search of the information they need and then find new questions. And on one level, when they're younger, it bothers them that they still don't have the answer. But a lot of times when they're older, if they understand they're this tritype, they actually realize that they enjoy the discovery process. That's the type most inclined to journal. It's the type most inclined to give a long explanation because they give a lot of thought to why they do what they do. And giving kind of evidence or supporting facts as to what they believe they are. A lot of times when they book with me, if they don't know much about the Enneagram, they'll want to send me a letter ahead of time explaining everything they've ever thought about and want to send me pictures. Now, I realize a lot of people do that now because in the 90s and the 2000s, especially the beginning of the 2000s, when we all had websites, Don and Russ had a list board, a listserv, where they had someone who worked full-time managing this online community. It was like Reddit, only it was monitored in a healthier way so that people weren't abusive and attacking of one another. But to say that is that this tritype might identify as the 4. In fact, they usually do identify with the 4. And depending on the instinct, it can vary and how self-aware they are. But if they're 9 that's self-aware, then they're naturally going to recognize that they indeed want easy relating, but they want depth and kind of the magical parts. So the wish upon a star, the sensitivity, the intuition, they know they're intuitive. And here's the other thing. I think it was Joanne who found this picture, but it's the angry smile. That really captures the attention of a lot of people with this tritype because they're angry, but they don't feel like they can show it. So they kind of withhold their accepting energy, even if they aren't rejecting. That's what they'll identify with. And they know that they go to sleep to what is they don't want to think about, but because of the 6, it can still spin around and around. And when you lead with 6, they often report being torn between wanting to just keep things easy and mellow versus wanting deep and dramatic and intensity. And so the 6, being an intense type like the 4, wants to hold both. And the 6 being connected to 9, 2 types that are primary, they're quite indecisive. So they're happening at the same time, this polarity and this doubt and seeing the other side of everything, which is why it makes sense that they're mathematically over with the 6s, the head center. Okay, so I see this tritype differently. Some people are convinced that Amy Winehouse was a 4, but she is the archetypal example of the 6. And when you have someone accepting, modifying the 6 energy, and intuitive, so the 9 and the 4, you get someone that's deeply emotional and accommodating, and yet at the same time has the most self-doubt. And often multiple sources are needed before confirming something. But remember what I said earlier today, they're looking for confirmation that already agrees with them. And it's quite frustrating when people don't see in them what they have assessed in themselves, which causes a type of panic because it feels destabilizing to the 6, even if they're unaware of it, because you don't want people to know things about you that you don't know about yourself. So it's disconcerting if someone says, oh, no, you're not that, you're this. So they have to find it on their own. And this 6 is very sensitive and can be mistaken for a 4 or a 2. Alessio?
Yeah, here we see as example Amy Winehouse. She was a very emotional singer, but she had quite the tragic life story if you actually dig deeper in her. She also had problems like depression, apparently manic depression, BPD.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, anxiety, anorexia. There is a lot of information you can find about her life. There is a lot of data valuable about her.
And that's why we can't, again, decide her type based on her manic depressive or her depression. We have to instead base it on what she talked about. Now, in her song, she did talk a lot about her depression, but it was the way she talked about it that 6s do. You can get a lot of the same kind of writing with, I do think Amy was the sexual, but another 6 is the very famous.
Adele.
A lot of people want to make her a 4, and she does have 4 in the Tritype, but she's actually a 6 as well. And you see it kind of in the way she looks for reassurance and goes, hi, like this. She doesn't go, hi, like a 7. Some people think she's a 7. She just goes, hi, you see her on a talk show, and she is nervous, and she talks about her anxiety. And she's not even the sexual subtype, but she does have 4 as her heart type. So it's very noteworthy to see when 4 shows up in a Tritype with 6, because then it amplifies the emotion.
And one interesting piece of that about Adele, she really likes the song, it was like Espresso by Sabina Camperter, like another singer, which I think might be the sexual 6 instead, with sexual social clause, like 6 to 8 probably or similar. Yeah, and you can see how she parodied like piece of the song that she goes like I work late because I'm a singer, something like that. She does a funny parody.
Yeah, the humor from the 6 is amazing. Okay, the 269, this is the Good Samaritan. This is the 6 that just really has to help. This was my elder son. And if I needed something, I learned pretty darn early that he'd give up anything to be devoted to meeting what he called the family values. Like he'd kind of hit his chest and say, Mom, it's family. I do it for family. And as a social 6 with the tall pattern of social, he even wanted me to use a picture of him in his cap and gown to show type 6, social 6. Whereas I'd never in a million years use a picture of me in a cap and gown, and neither would my son. But the social 6, it's whatever they identify with. They're like a true fan. And so he was a true fan of his family, and he felt like I was his biggest supporter. So I would say, oh, Brandon, are you still playing softball with your friends and bowling? Like, when do you do that? And I try to figure out when he might be able to help me move to set up a moving date, because I didn't want him to not meet with his friends, but then it turned out he was doing something every single night and every single day. He had all these different groups that he would be with. Now, he's the extreme example of the ENFP 629, and he always wanted to be the confidant to all his friends, male and female, and from a very, very young age, which you see a lot with the ENFP, but you also see it with this Tritype. So this is the 6 that identifies with being kind of soft and interpersonal, but they don't realize how strong they are. I see them as the accepting and caring 6, and they can play amazing roles. Many actors and actresses have this Tritype, and they're really can take the shape of the caring person. So this is the most gentle and supportive and engaging 6. They'll do really kind of things that we think of as 2-ish, like my son back when we had little cassette tapes. So you had to put in a song, record it, stop, move the tape, put in a song, record it, stop. And he created a tape with all my favorite songs in the exact order that I would want them. And we would think this is 2, but it's really also 6 with 2. And it's just that you want to be seen and valued for what you bring to your important people in your life, whether you're social, sexual, or self-pres. But where they struggle is that they still naturally are passive aggressive because they don't want to get in an overt fight, but they don't want to be too submissive either. So they're kind of stuck in this, okay, I can't really say it, but I'm irritated and I want to kind of not be in this situation. So they'll do something that makes them feel like they've discharged the energy. Because remember, all 6s and 8s and 4s have very quick rise of the adrenaline. Now, all human beings have that, but in terms of the types, it's the 4, 6, and 8 that have that immediate visceral response. What would you say more about Amelia?
Oh yeah, so as an example here we have Emilia Clarke. It's interesting to notice the contrast between the character she played in Game of Thrones to actually herself in her life, and how many people do not recognize her at all. She even mentioned in interviews like, but many people like best pat a certain image. Also, she used to wear also
The
wig
white hair
in the show. And then, if you actually see in real life, she's very relational, very smiley, very
vivacious, yeah.
yeah. And one interesting thing, several people think that she's an extrovert. Actually, she mentioned publicly that she used a persona, say that she's actually an introvert, but she fakes being extroverted for work, which sometimes happens with actors.
And for sure happens with 6s because it depends on the situation.
Yeah, in my opinion, she might be an ISFJ, but fake ESFJ. Yeah, and it's very interesting case with her. Yeah, but she can sound like an ESFJ, as for example, if you just watch the. But if you, for example, watch around Conan, there is an interview in which she talks about that she was in an hotel, and in this hotel, basically there was a marriage, like Game of Thrones style, and the immediate reaction was to just get away from that. And Conan would say, "Oh, really? I would just the opposite. I would just go there." In the Conan, in my opinion, is extroverted.
He's over the top extrovert.
Yeah, some kind probably of ENF, maybe like an ENFJ, VDHD, probably something like that. Is definitely an extrovert. And you notice the contrast, and then you can notice that she's right when she said that she's more of an introvert. But then she fixed extroversion for her work. Yeah.
Perfect. Now, the 1-2-6 is the most kind of dutiful, organized, rigid Tritype of 6. And that's because the 1 says you need to not be bad. And the 2 says you need to be the good person. So sometimes 2s mistype as 1s. 1s don't mistype as 2s. but twos can mistype as one, especially the social two, because the two is the most ambitious type in the Enneagram. And when it's mixed with an 8 or 1, it becomes more amplified. But if they're social with the 1, 2, 6, then they're most inclined to want to do something for the sake of humanity. You'll see that with the 1, 2, 5, the 1, 2, 6, and the 1, 2, 7. But in the case of the 6, you will notice the loyalty. It is a strong value. They'll be loyal to something or someone, but it'll be an ideal. And they'll try to maintain those standards, yet they like things that give them a chance to participate. Now, what was lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram is the 2, because only the 269 was in the descriptions that went through. And as I said, Echazo had his private school, so the information wasn't getting out and people signed confidentiality agreements. And Echazo stopped teaching for 24 years, which is why so many of us had kind of misinformation because we didn't learn it directly from them. And some of it I didn't learn until I studied with them. And then I realized, wow, that makes total sense. And gee, the people I interviewed mentioned that, but I maybe didn't notice that it was a real thing until I had more people. But once I learned about these errors, and if you think about the description of type 2, it's like the sexual 2 is seduction and assault and conquest. And that's not a mild-mannered type. And the same thing with the self-pres, it's me first. And the social is the most ambitious type of all. And I like to use examples of the Asian cultures that have the seduction, like the mental seduction of while they're doing one thing and the same time building an army over here and knowing just how to put their energy wherever they want it. So they're very smart, very shrewd, and not to be underestimated. And that's the 2. So don't think that the 2 is this like wallflower, weak person. Their dichotomy is will versus freedom. And that is that they have very strong willpower. They want their way, and they will keep trying to convince people to do what they want to do. And they want to share it with you. And they eventually might give up, but they'll find someone else to do it with, because the 2 needs relationship. Well, so does the 6. So anytime 2 and 6 comes together, you're going to have someone that highly values their relationships. But now if it's 9, like my son, then you want it easy, comfortable relating. And if it's 1, like the 621 or 612, you have someone that is focused on doing what's right and the best way it should be done, with the shoulds becoming more important and emphasizing being a good person and minimizing any mistake they made, because 1 and 6 do not feel comfortable making any kind of mistake, even the tiniest one. That's why there's so many sitcoms where you have to have a 6 who's going to break something and then push it under the couch or do something. I mean, that's like, you can't get in trouble. But the 1 will be the one with the moral lesson and shaking the finger or saying no, and, contempt like this. Then if we look at, one of my dear, dear, dear friends, David Daniels, he lived in the Bay Area, and he's the one that got me on board with helping plan the 1996 conference, when we didn't know if it was ever going to come into existence. We'd had the IEA conference, but we hadn't built the IEA yet. And he said, Catherine, you know everybody, because I'd gone to all these certifications. You can get people involved and interested. And he's just an extraordinary man. But when we were in a study group where we met once a month and talked about the types and our own type and working with the other types. And when I introduced him to my findings in probably 95 with Tritype, he said, Katherine, this fits. He said, I never knew how to explain how I was definitely aware of the lines to 3 and 9, but that didn't match like the 1, 2, and 6. So 1 and 2, he was certain of. And he was even trying to promote it, even though he never taught Tritype. He'd just send them to me. But he did a little mini video you may have seen on his own Tritype with a couple other people talking about their Tritype, like what they got out of knowing their Tritype, that I have on my YouTube channel. But it was really extraordinary. So here's the part about 6 that I want you to understand. Like he said, secretly, he always worried about being a coward. And I go, yeah, but you're willing to acknowledge something that wasn't a part of what you learned originally. He goes, yeah, but I'm smart. I've been a therapist for many years. I kind of know my tendencies in myself. He goes, am I going to go shout it to everybody? No, but I'll make the video for you so that you've got it. And I'm going to write you a new endorsement, which he did a couple of times. The most recent was right before he died, which I thought was very nice. He said, no, people need to know that I endorsed what you found. So here's that moral value that comes with type 1. A good person, type 2, and good values, 2 and 1, with the innate desire of the 6 to be engaged with others. I really attribute the success of the IEA to David Daniels, because without him, it may have never come into being. It was a wonderful concept at the end of the conference in 1994, but no one wanted to put any time into making it happen. And he worked tirelessly to do that. And just an extraordinarily nice man. But he did all, like if someone said something, go, can you believe this? And he'd get his little shoulders up. And then other times he'd just say, no, we can't do that. And you could just see how his gut type was type 1. And just a wonderful, wonderful man. What made you choose his picture, Edie?
I chose him because I noticed how supportive he was of Tritype, and I think he deserved to be put in as example, considering to what degree of support to give it to you for Tritype, but also for personal life situation that you mentioned in the past. So
yeah, he's the real deal.
Yeah.
And wrote a great book on relationships and involved all of us in his research studies. And so he was involved in all of mine. It was really someone who wanted to see the Enneagram grow rather than an individual faction of the Enneagram. He wanted all of it to grow. And that's the high side of a healthy 6.
I add that my mom is the Sister 1. She's the social Sister 1 server sage. And I did interview a surprise Sister 1, Leah Scott, in my YouTube channel, The Enneamentalist. So for who wants to check out, that's also a great example, like David Daniels of a Sister 1.
Yeah, actually, we have Leah in a picture, but not an individual Tritype. Yeah, but she belongs here. Yes. So the 268. Okay, now you have your person that unconsciously their entire lives knows they want to make a difference in the lives of others. This is the 6 that knows they want to be a hero. Like when 6s are growing up, usually if you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, usually one of the things they want to be is a hero. And at the very least, rescuing people and making a difference. So a lot of firemen and emergency services, first responders are this Tritype, because you have the 6 who's willing to go against their fear. They have 8 in the Tritype, so it's counterphobic, and they want to help people. Now, the other thing is that 6 and 8 are 2 reactive types. 2 and 8 share a line of connection. 2 and 6 are the most kind of hysterical of the types. And so that means they amp up their emotions quite quickly. And then there's the aspect of what happens when the 3 comes together. And of course, you always want to look at the connecting lines and wings. And the 6 and 8 share a 7 wing. It's intriguing to see how, even though 6 does not have a natural connection to 2 or 8, when this tritype comes together, it's undeniable. And this is the person who is the knight, a version of what we saw before. But I worked with several fire departments over a period of a few years, and emergency services, and that would be the planes that are helicopters that fly into rugged terrain where someone's been injured and hard to get to. So there were a lot of counterphobic 6s with this tritype, and 7s, 2, 7, 8 were the 2 most common tritypes. And they weren't afraid to go into dangerous territory. But what I noticed is that when interviewing them, they would conflict after they got the patient to the hospital. And the 7 would say, okay, we did it. We gave them their best chance. Now it's up to others to help them survive, and then need to separate from that painful emotion. And the 6s would want to talk about the pain because it would impact them, the identification with the underdog, this person who was hurt. And I had to do a lot of conflict management between these 2 types in this type of situation, whether they were firemen or emergency services, nurses, or what have you, because what happens after that intensity is very different. And again, the 6 needs to talk and get out of their mind the pain that they felt with the underdog having such a difficult future ahead of them, projecting that negative future where the 7s would say, I can't do it. I was there 100%, getting them, hooked up and in the vehicle, the helicopter or the small plane. I can't do it anymore. And the 6 couldn't understand that. And the 7 couldn't understand why the 6 still needed to talk about it. So sometimes people of this tritype that lead with 6 will think they're a 7, but all they have to do is consider how they feel about emotional pain. And the 6 needs to talk about it, and the 7 wants to bury it. And it's just 2 different defense strategies. But they're quite remarkable, and they like the teamwork like the 3, 6, 8. So that's why kind of being brothers in arms, or like a group of firemen live together. And like I had to work with the emergency companies teams where they'd be all different types. And of course, they needed to eat meals together. And the socials want everyone to participate, bring food for the meals, all sit down together. And the 9s just wanted to sleep or chill out, or maybe brought their own food. And the sexuals just wanted to talk one-on-one with their favorite person. So once they understood, these are just instincts and type related. But because there were so many 6s in the mix, like in the tritype, many leading with 6, that's why the social 6s didn't feel comfortable when everyone wasn't acting like a group, when there wasn't an emergency. Whereas when they're in these little ambulances or vehicles that are the immediate response, the emergency services, it's just 2 of them. And so they become very in sync, which 6s like. But they're fiery, they want to be attractive, they want to be, like the bulls. It's the 8 represents the bull. The bridge of connection is the 2. You see the actual helping, but the hands. If you look at any board with 2 in it, you'll see a hand somewhere, a handshake, a hand, or here's a hand with the face. They like hands. And I can't explain it, but even when I didn't tell them they had to have a hand on their board, almost always someone in a tritype with 2 would send me a picture of a hand. So I've got to tell you how important that is to them. It's a sign of goodwill. It's the sign of friendship and camaraderie. It's offering help, like in this hand right here, the helping hand. And yet you do see this lion who's roaring, but it's not quite like the other roaring where it was more like, it's like, it's a long roar. But, and of course, excess is still there. And there is a boom quality. They're willing to risk their lives for us, usually, no matter what they do. So in everyday life, if they see someone in need, like I just recently watched a documentary, like 4 episodes on how the 2004 tsunami started and what they knew when, and then stories that had not been heard before from people at the source of the earthquake and what happened, how it wiped out an entire city, except for one little boy that lived, I think, 2 or 3 weeks by himself until they came to look to see if anybody was there. But having said that, there were 2 examples potentially of this tritype where they wanted to leave to save themselves or their family, but they just couldn't do it. They tried to get their person to safety, but they had to go back and help. And so it isn't just the 269. This is the helper that's the 628, 826, or 268 in any order. But when it's 6, you have someone that just lets go of their fear and goes into difficult or dangerous circumstances for those they care about. And sometimes they just care about humanity. It doesn't have to be intimates or their social group. It's just they cannot turn a blind eye. I see this as direct because of the 8 and because of the 2 caring. So we get that combination with the 6, which is kind of always ambivalent, like wanting to be both their lines and both their wings. But it's an extremely supportive 6. They're a true rescuer. They'll always have stories where they just naturally stepped in when something happened. They're almost always mistaken as a 2 or 8 because they're quite willing to put themselves at risk, which people think, oh, 6s don't do that. Well, yeah, the counterphobic 6 does. And this type also needs to be seen as caring and protective to be secure. And they need to do that to be secure because the 6 feels that if they do for others, when they have a need, others will do for them. And so that amplifies the supportive nature of the 6. They can look like 3s if they're a priest, like Jessica Chastain. But if you listen to their stories, they're very clearly talking about the values of a 6, not a little bit about 2 and a little bit about 8. But all priests look like 3s at first until you know what they're talking about and what their little expressions do. So this is the helpful 6, but they're actively helping. Like one woman in the example I gave you needed to go check on people, but she turned around and helped with the whole planning and organizing of the airlift out of one of the locations to get people help, like whether they were going to go by boat, the injured, or on the first vehicles that came in that were helicopters or planes. And yet when she made a mistake in her mind, and there were 2 people that were very injured, and the one helicopter was there and another was coming in, she put the person whose life she thought was at more immediate risk on the aircraft, and then put pregnant woman with her baby, and she'd been hurt from all the injuries of a tsunami. And then that pregnant woman didn't make it. And so the self-attack that the 6 will have if they didn't protect the underdog is really noteworthy. they can't just let go of it. Just like the example I gave you a moment ago with the type that needed to talk about the pain of seeing someone in such dire circumstances and putting 100% into hoping they will make it. AD?
Okay, here we can see as example Jessica Chastain. She featured in arguably my favorite film, Interstellar. If you haven't seen that film, go watch it. Masterpiece. And she portrayed Marv.
So what's important to understand is, again, what have we got? We've got an 8 with a line to 2, a 2 with the line to 8, with the 6 that amplifies the 8-2 line, and the 2 intense types, the 8 and the 6. And then also what we have is the fact that the 6 automatically becomes counterphobic because 8 is in the Tritype. And she often plays a character that is tough.
Yeah, I add more. I also add that if you go and watch her interview, she talks about, for example, how she learned martial arts. And additionally, also, she is very caring. And you can see, for example, how she goes for someone was disturbing Naomi Watts. And then she goes, you don't touch Naomi Watts. Like, yeah, and she go up protecting her.
Yeah, they're fascinating. And like, people were surprised that I identified that she was a 6, but the counterphobic 6, because she's so pretty and had the chiseled features. But that's just because they didn't realize that all priests look like 3s. And then second would be 7, but even the 7s that have the priest archetype are first thought to be 3s. And that's a whole nother thing, that there was a stereotype for each type. But actually, you have all 7 archetypes in every Enneagram type. Some are just more common than others. Okay, the 1-4-6. Now you have a really intense type because the 6 and 4 are doubting, and the 1 does not want to make a mistake. Neither does the 6. So you have that 1-6 mix with the 1-4-4-1 mix with the 6-1 similarity with responsibility. So you have someone who needs to be correct, authentic, responsible, sincere, and willing to state the truth and do what should be done. So what do they feel? They often feel, because the 6 is splitting between their heart type and their gut type, is they're going to feel more emotional, because 1 also has a line to 4. So there's a lot more 4 energy going on than meets the eye on the surface, because it's amplified. But the 2 most emotionally expressive types, because some types are emotional, but it's way down, hidden from view. And yet they have to be responsible. They're focused on not making a mistake. They're focused on being a good exemplar of a good neighbor, a good all-around person because of the 6. So that includes fixing what's wrong, pointing out what needs to be corrected. So in a way, they're critical, but they're more critical of themselves than they are anyone else. And there's a quality to the self-criticism that other people don't understand how hard they are on themselves. A 6 with 4 and 1 is more inclined to voice that. The 4 will just have the critical thinking, but they identify more with the self, what's going on with them. Whereas the 1 in the Tritype has this value that you need to be responsible and do as you should. And the 6 meeting that amplifies it. So they don't want to say anything critical, but they will if they think it should happen. And they're just merciless with themselves. Like if they make the smallest mistake, especially a social faux pas, they will go over it and go over it and go over it because it lives with them. It doesn't just fade away out of memory like it might with the 7 or an 8 or a 3, because those are 3 types that want to remember things in a positive way. They don't want to go into the past. But with the 6 and the 4, who lives in the past, and the 1 who's trying to create a better, improved future, and the 6 who's projecting a negative future, so you better improve it, you have someone that's going to really try to do what's right and try to make a difference in what they do. So they need to, of course, always lighten up on how hard they are on themselves, that no one can be that good all the time. On the one collage, there's a picture of a little plate that has a little girl sitting there. And I can't remember if she has little tiny wings, but it's a painted little girl on a plate. And all the ones said, oh, yeah, I totally understand. I felt just like that little girl. And I'm thinking, the little girl on the plate? Yeah. She's sad? I said, yeah. And I'm looking at the picture and I go, oh, I guess she is kind of tense. Maybe she didn't want to have her picture painted. And all the ones not realizing, because I didn't choose the picture, but a 1 did. And the other ones all validated it, that that's the way they felt, because you could not be that good all the time. Or in the 6 mind, you could not be good for one value or one person if the other person disagreed. And it's very disconcerting if you have people with different rules, different values, and you're trying to uphold your highest standards. And this 6 does. So usually they'll often just blurt something or that they want to say that they're holding back on, or they'll just try to stop themselves from saying something. But because they're an impulsive type to begin with, a 6, and they've got 4 in there and the strident quality of 1, they're gonna at times say the things that they'd give anything in the world that they hadn't said, because they don't want any pushback and they don't want to be mean, but they value correctness. That's why you have the little lectern down here. So if you understand that they value correctness, but deep down they're sad and sensitive, and they're looking out for what people should or shouldn't do, depending on the instinct, like the social 6 will do it the most, you will start to understand why they are confusing to people, that if you know them personally, they'll do anything for you. But if you don't, you can kind of be a little put off when they build up the courage to say something, because it's not like an 8, like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, someone's going to kind of think you're an idiot. It's more that it's not personal. It's just like a fact to the 8. But with the 6, they feel like it's permanent. It's etched on their soul, like a stain on their soul if it's 6 and 4. And then 1, it's like deeper than the deepest tattoo. So when you understand that about this tritype, you can understand why they mistype as 1s. And because they're sad about not measuring up the way they think they should because of those really high standards, you can understand why they might be torn. Am I a 1 or a 4? Am I a 1 or a 4? Okay. This I see as the discerning and intuitive 6. So it's an interesting mix. There's a gentleness, but there's a certainty that comes with this tritype. It's I would say of all the 6s, this tritype is the most certain about what they believe in, but they're not certain about what they're going to do or you're going to do, but their values are very strong. So they're particular, they're persnickety, they're very creative because they have that double, 1, 4, 4, 1. And if the 6, if they identify more with their 7 wing, that amplifies the creativity. And they can be torn between the need for meaning, they're 4, and the need to be dutiful and responsible. That's the 6-1, 6-1. So even if they are really creative, they might push it down and feel, no, they need to be responsible first. They need to do what needs to be done before they do something for themselves. And yet we think of the 4 as being in pursuit of what they want to do. And 4s with this tritype are a little more inclined to do that, but they're still moralistic. But the 6 feels like, yeah, I can't be wrong. I can't make a mistake. I have to make up for any mistakes that I've made as well. So they can sometimes over apologize. The 2-6-9 leading with 6 and the 4-6-1 leading with 6 can often over apologize or overly kind of lecture with this tritype about the way they should or shouldn't be. So they also are natural teachers and from the heart because of the 4. It brings in that idea that what really matters, the authentic self, becomes quite valuable because of the 1's line to 4 and the 4 in the tritype and the emotions of the 4 and the 6. And actually 1s underneath it all are very sensitive and emotional. Alessio, David?
As a potential exemplar, we see here Kim Basinger. She's a famous actress. She starred in many films. She displays very well the openness that you can see in this tritype. Additionally, you can find, for example, an interview where she talked about the bankruptcy that she had problems because she bought an land that was of a town. There was a controversy about that or involved. Yeah, you can find how critical she was about herself, about the whole issue. Find
Very
it.
strong opinions. Yeah, thank you. Very,
Yeah.
very.
Yeah, also she was estranged from her mother for years and then apparently they reconciled years later. Yeah, she's a good example of this tritype, in my
And you
opinion.
can see the strength in her jaw. And 8 and 1 often have a strong jaw. So if 9, not so much, but if you have the 8 or the 1, it often brings a strong jaw. And in her case, I think she's 6-1-4 in that order. So yeah, you're not going to back down if you're that combination, because if you feel right and morally right. So this is the 6 that naturally mistypes as a 1 for sure. Okay. So we went over, but it's sure hard to stop. I have a little more time, so we could answer questions. All right. I know that was like intense, like screen. But we wanted to give those of you that are 6s, or those of you that work with 6s or have 6s in your lives, to kind of understand how diverse they are. And the tritype gives this ability to understand more about why they focus on what they focus on. Now, I do have individual videos for each tritype, but are there any questions?
We do have a question in the chat.
Okay, yes.
Hello. Didn't want like to steal the time, but nobody's asking. So I passed your test, Catherine, and I'm 258, which is I think I'm 8 and I feel like 8, but people think that I talk and behave like 6, and they tell me, "Oh, you don't behave like, or like you don't sound like 8, but you sound like 6."
What I'd have to ask you is why you decided that you had 8 as your gut type. Now it's in 3rd position, so why?
So because I get everything I want, and I don't struggle to get it for me.
Excuse me, how is that 8? Some people are really good at getting what they want. 8s aren't the best at it because we say things too automatic in a way. We're not good at diplomacy, but if you lead with 2, there is diplomacy. but do you have doubt? Like, do you often ask people what they think your type might be?
I don't often ask because I had only passed this test for Enneagram 2 months ago. So I was
Oh.
at education. Yes, I was
Oh,
at education and
yeah.
I read all the types and I listened to them stories, what each number is doing. And I was thinking that I'm maybe 7, maybe 3. But when I passed the test, it was like 8. So that's how I feel. And when I'm
that mean, which test did you take? That would help me.
I'm not from Eastern Europe, so that was in Russian. So they don't have any names
And
for
do you
this
know
test.
who
Like,
made it? Do you know who made the test?
do
they have images at all or words?
no,
like I
no,
did?
no. I passed your test with images when I was selecting how pictures and words match.
Yeah.
And also how I make decisions and how I describe myself. So I passed your test, which is 258, and then I passed the test when I learned Enneagram in other school, Russian-speaking school, and that was 8 by my test. But when we had that interview, when a trainer of Enneagram asking the typology, so they look at you and they ask you questions and then tell you, oh, you may be 8, maybe not 8. So 2 of those told me that I'm 6.
Yeah,
not 8.
you do look more like a 6.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. There's a personable, kind of engaging quality and the first impression, which isn't absolute, but is noteworthy, is your ability to kind of negotiate the space in a fluid manner, which usually means 2 and 6 as opposed to 2 and 5. So I would suggest at the very least that your head type is 6, not 5. But then now you need to see, looking at it from that perspective, if you still identify with the solid aspect of type 8. Now, 2 has a line to 8. And remember, I said at the beginning that 2 was one of the types where a whole chunk of it was left out. That is a very dynamic type. But they do know how to be diplomatic and promote goodwill. So they often get what they want because they know how to ground people and do it in a polite way or by giving people things. But with the 8, you would know the moment anywhere in your tritype when you just go definite. It doesn't mean you have to get angry. It doesn't mean that you yell or scream, because that doesn't make you an 8 or not an 8. What makes you an 8 is when your defense strategy is that's enough. And then you're out of the conversation. You're not going to keep talking about it. Whereas if there's anything troubling a 6, they're going to keep thinking about it, keep talking about it. Whereas the 8 might, even say in a partnership relationship, are we going to have to talk a lot about this? Because it's not what the 8 wants to do. They'll voice what maybe concerns them, but thereafter you totally let it go because denial. So you have to have the defense strategy of the 2. Well, idealized images and the defense strategy of the 2, the 6 and the 8. And if you don't have all 3, you need to look for another type till you have all 3. So I'm trying to think if there's anywhere I have these posted. Like, I think I do. On one of my pages, I have the idealized image, the core fears, and the defense strategies, because it really, really helps. Because if you find those, and the defense strategies came from Claudio Naranjo, and when he created the buckets of the 9 types, so he had Echazo's types, and then he took all his experience as a personality researcher from the early 60s through his entire career. Always look at 3 things whenever we're looking at a type. not just one or two. It's not dialectic, it's trialectic. So what do you do when you're angry and you don't want to do something any longer? What do you normally do? It could be a little thing or a big thing. We're usually pretty much the same. Well, at least
like for a big thing, I just don't do it.
And how do you not do it? Do you tell people you're not going to do it, or do you just not do it?
I just don't do it.
And why wouldn't you tell them, no, I'm not going to do it?
Oh, I don't tell them I don't do this. Yeah, I think I don't do this. I don't tell them. And the example can be cleaning the house. And let's say with my husband, I don't want to clean the house. And he would tell, oh, the house is too dirty. And I'm like ignoring and went away. So I'm not telling him I'm not cleaning this. I just don't want to clean it. I'm just ignoring.
Yeah, then consider a different gut type. That's more like type 9, where you just avoid it. Whereas one feels a moral obligation to clean, and the 8 will say, no, I don't want to clean it, you clean it, or whatever it is, or no, I want to go do this. We won't just say nothing because we want to get it over with. We want to make our statement and then free to pursue where we want to go. And I'm not saying good behavior or bad behavior. I'm saying the natural instinctual response is to declare what's true for you. But it's the 6 that will, and 9 that will conceal it because they don't want to be in the conflict. Still want to get their way.
Okay, so looking at 9 also makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Consider that you probably still have the 2, but to see what happens with the 2, 6, 9, because they often use that passive aggressive quality I was talking about to survive. So they want to have their way, and they're strong in wanting their way, but they don't want to be known as a difficult person. So they'll say nothing rather than say something that can be used against them. So it's a fascinating defense strategy. And if by some chance you lead with the 6, then you would notice how you sometimes will be feisty, maybe not definite like an 8, but where you get heated and your energy gets bigger, but then it goes down because you're not really meant to be at that level of certainty. So if you doubt and you second guess, you must consider type 6 or 9 in the tritype.
6 or 9. Not 2, 5, 8, but 2, 6, 9.
Yeah, 2, 5, 8 is someone who moves towards others or away or against, but they're quite moody. You feel them. Both hexad types are quite moody. So that's the 2, 5, 8 and the 1, 4, 7, because they're really shifting to a totally different quality in the centers. So 1 with 4 is like the 1 wants to hold their strength, and the 4 is like, no, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling sensitive. And then the 7 is, no, can't feel sad, can't feel sensitive. I need to go to a more positive future. So there's still differences. And the same with 2, 5, 8. The 2 says, oh, come here, I'll help. I know just what you need. I know you better than you know yourself.
Not me.
Is that you or not?
No. So come here, I will help you, not me.
Okay. Then you don't
I will tell you what to do. This is me.
Okay. And why? Why will you tell people what to do?
Because I know better.
And how do you know better? It isn't what you do, it's why you do it.
I don't know why I know better. I just know.
Well, it's a good thing to pursue because you were very quick to say you knew better. And that is important. That's how you show your gut energy. So you wouldn't be totally off, but if you have the 6, 6s feel that way too. if
Mm-hmm.
something they believe they know better.
Mhm.
But the why is more important. Like if it means that the person's going to keep being upset, then you just want them to get it over with. Certain types will want that. If it means the person doesn't know themselves and you just want them to know themselves, you might tell them what to do. Or if you think they're not going to do it, then you might want to tell them what to do. You
Mhm.
showed your strength right there. And that could be 2, 6, and in some cases, type 8, if you have the other factors. But how much anxiety do you experience on a daily basis? Worry.
I don't recognize it. Like I'm trying to find it. So I think I have that I don't like making fast decisions, and when people want me to make a fast decision, I just eliminate those people. I don't do harm to them.
No, I understand. I understand. It's just when we get around the superego, we say things that are very revealing. And the fact that you get rid of them, you're making them go away somehow.
Yeah.
And so that means your gut type prefers that they're gone. Why?
Mhm.
Why?
Um,
What would you have to deal with if they weren't gone?
listening to them, trying to understand what they want. Yeah, I think listening to other people and understanding their point of view. Maybe that's not what I have to do this. I don't like it.
Yeah. So just explore more on your own why you do what you do, just like I asked you.
Mhm.
And don't judge it good, bad, right, or wrong. You can smile if you want, like I did. But then you want to just see what is that crazy, irrational fear I have if I'm not, like in my case, I gave the example of being protective. So what if I'm not protective? I mean, my first answer, not knowing the Enneagram, would be, I'm always protective. Well, what if you weren't? Well, it's not going to happen. And that's what our superego does. But we have to get around that and say, okay, what's the crazy fear if I'm not protective? And in my case, it would be, I would not have value. So we each try to seek value by kind of providing something for people, but it's different for each type.
Yeah, I always seek for like stability. When people do not distract me, I'm like stable and yeah, stable and strong, I think. So I'm scared of not being able to do everything by myself.
And that's 6. 6
Okay.
wants to know someone's there when they need them. Now, not all 6s want to be with someone all the time, but most 6s want a trusted other, someone who's passed the test of being trustworthy most of the time. And that is the deal. Like my 6th son, I was that to him. I passed all the tests of being there no matter what for him. And that's what he wanted in his friends, and that's what he wanted in his girlfriends. So look for that thing we can offer so that we get what we need. And that's where instinct comes into play too. So you identify with self-pres, which is quite fierce and 8ish if their need goes unmet. And the self-pres 2, for what it's worth, if you are in fact the 2, self-pres 2, they are the most entitled. They don't want to do housework. They will take care of the person who provides for them, but they don't ever want to be told what to do.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So you might be quite right with that too. It's just what order is it for you? If 6, 2, 8, then there'd be something in you that's a hero. And if it's 6, 2, 9, if you would still somehow want to do things for the people you care about. You
Oh,
would,
for people, yeah, for people I care about, yes, they live their lives.
yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, that's amazing. You're so new to this and have gone so deep with it. I really wish you the best.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you
you.
everybody for your patience. And I hope to see you next month when Spence and I are here talking about the influence of the instincts and how to use them in relationships if you don't already. All right. Oh, Joanne. Yes, thank you. She's the one right there that made all the Enneamaps years ago and then helped me with all the collages, did all the cutting. And yeah, I got to tell you, those 1, 2, 5s, INTJs are extraordinary. Okay, we'll see you next month if you choose to join. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.